not the kind of person who jumps to conclusions. I'm a single mom, I work full-time, and I've got enough on my plate without letting my imagination get carried away. But what happened last summer still messes with my head. My daughter is 6. We live in a modest neighborhood tucked into the woods. Everyone there knows each other. People leave their doors unlocked, kids ride their bikes until sundown, that sort of thing. My daughter has always been imaginative. She draws a lot, talks to her stuffed animals, makes up elaborate games. So when she started talking about her new imaginary friend, I didn't put a lot on it. She called him Danny, said he was funny and liked to meet her in the trees. I thought maybe it was a character from a cartoon or book I hadn't paid attention to. But little things started to bug me. She would say stuff like, Danny only comes out when it's dark, or he lives in the woods. Once she added very matter-of-factly that I couldn't meet him because Danny doesn't like adults. That's when I started listening more closely. One night, I passed by her room around 11 o'clock and I heard her whispering. I opened her door and her window was open. She was leaning close to it like she'd been talking to someone just outside. I walked in and asked who she was talking to. She jumped when she realized I was there and said nobody. Another time I noticed food missing. Juice boxes, snack packs, granola bars. At first, I thought maybe I was just tired and forgetting how much we had, but then I caught her sneaking peanut butter crackers into her backpack. When I asked her what she was doing, she just said, Danny's always hungry. She started mentioning weird things, too, like how Danny had tattoos all over, or how he used to have a house, but now he sleeps in the leaves. It wasn't cute anymore. It felt wrong. One night, I found her kneeling at the living room window, whispering again. She was holding a granola bar out, like she was offering it to someone. When I called her name, she jumped and slammed the screen down. That's when I started asking around. I talked to a few parents on the street, casually asked if their kids had ever mentioned someone named Danny. No one had heard anything. There weren't any kids named Danny in the neighborhood, no relatives visiting, nothing. I got spooked and installed a motion light outside the back door. It started going off a lot at night, but I could never catch anyone out there. Every time I checked, the yard was empty. Then I woke up one night and found my daughter trying to unlock the sliding glass door. She was in her pajamas, hair messy, clearly half asleep. I asked her what she was doing, and she said Danny wanted to come inside and watch cartoons. I lost it. Not angry, scared. I sat her down and told her she couldn't talk to Danny anymore, that he wasn't real. She looked at me like I'd just told her that Santa died. Then she said something I'll never forget. Danny said not to tell. After that, I locked everything. My nerves were completely shot. Then came the worst night of my life. It was around 2 a.m. I heard the fridge open. I thought maybe my daughter had gotten up for water, so I went to check. I walked into the kitchen and saw a man crouched in front of the fridge. He was eating cold chicken with his bare hands. He was bald, rail thin, and covered in tattoos, just like my daughter had said. She was standing next to him, clutching her stuffed rabbit. At that moment, my daughter looked at me and said, "Hi, Mommy." Then he looked at me. No expression, like I was the one who didn't belong there. For a long second, we just stared at each other. Then, out of nowhere, he just bolted out the back door so fast I didn't even have time to scream. I called 911. They came, looked around, and took statements, but there were no fingerprints, no signs of forced entry. Their best guess was that it was a transient, maybe somebody camping in the woods. My daughter never mentioned Danny again. We got an alarm system, floodlights, even one of those doorbell cameras, but I barely slept for weeks. As the months went by, I started to feel normal again. Then, one night I found one of my daughter's drawings tucked into a book I was reading. It showed a tall man with black scribbles all over him. He was looming behind a little girl. Obviously, that discovery was entirely creepy enough, but the thing that sticks with me, the most messed up part about it, is that it was signed by Danny and not in my daughter's handwriting. My wife and I moved into a new neighborhood in early spring of 2019. It was a nice change of pace from where we had come from. It was quiet, clean, mostly middle-aged or older couples. It was also our first time owning a home, so we were excited. We were one of the younger couples on the block, just out of our 20s. About a week after we moved in, this guy came by. Early 60s, white hair, wore those tan tactical cargo pants I'm sure you've seen before. He also wore a polo shirt with a faded neighborhood watch badge pinned to it. He introduced himself as the unofficial head of security on the block. Said he'd lived there for 25 years and knew everything that went on. He handed us a handwritten list of license plate numbers, said they were suspicious vehicles he'd seen in the area over the years, and to keep an eye out. The whole interaction was so absurd it almost felt like a prank, but we were respectful and in some strange way felt almost more secure knowing somebody was so obsessed with looking after the neighborhood. We laughed a lot about it later. It was pretty weird, but at the end of the day, harmless. Like something an overly paranoid uncle might do or something. As time went on, at first he'd just wave when we saw him walking by. But over the next few weeks, he started coming to the door more and more. There was always an excuse. Did we hear about the break-in 2 blocks over? Had we noticed the suspicious vehicle idling near the corner yesterday? One time he brought a flyer for a self-defense class at the community center. Just stuff like that. It started to get uncomfortable when he kept showing up unannounced. Sometimes at 9 p.m., other times while we were making breakfast. Once, right in the middle of dinner. He'd knock, then launch into some long story about spotting squatters 2 streets over, or how he was pretty sure someone was running a trafficking ring out of a nearby garage. We tried to be polite, but it was getting weird. He'd ask if we'd seen anything suspicious, but always with this intensity that made you feel like any answer was wrong. He'd hint that some of the other neighbors weren't to be trusted and that we should keep our eyes open. At that point, it stopped being funny. It just felt like sad and creepy or something. Then, one night, out of the corner of my eye, I saw a light moving in our backyard. I looked out the window and saw him slowly pacing along the fence line with a flashlight. I went out and asked what he was doing. He said he thought he saw someone jump the fence and was just checking it out. That's when I told him flat out that we didn't want him on our property without permission. He looked almost surprised, like I'd insulted him. He said he was only trying to help and that we should be grateful someone was looking out for us. And then he just walked off without another word. After that, we put up a motion sensor light in the yard, started keeping the blinds closed more often, but it didn't stop. One morning, we found a typed note taped to our door. Said he'd spotted a vehicle of interest parked a few houses down and that we should be on alert. No greeting, no signature, just that. The last straw came a couple weeks later. My wife went out to grab something from the garage around 10 p.m. She opened the door and the guy was just standing there in our fucking garage holding a flashlight. He said he had heard something while he was out for a walk and thought we might be in trouble. My wife's knee-jerk reaction was to freak out and yell at him to get out. But he didn't move at first, just stared for a second, then looked at me, then back to her and said in this skin-crawling tone, "If you knew what I knew, you'd thank me." We said we were going to call the cops. That finally got a reaction, but not the one we were hoping for. He told us, "I am the police around here." Then he looked directly at me and told me to watch my back. Then he walked out. No apology, nothing. We locked everything. I even thought about buying a handgun, but my wife refused to have one in our house. A few nights after that, we woke up to bugs in our room, and one of the bedroom window screens was wide open. It hadn't been broken or cut, just forced open. I closed the screen and went to go look outside around the perimeter of the house. But when I reached the front door, it was hanging completely open. There was also a little note scrawled on a piece of paper sitting on the welcome mat. All it said was, "I suggest you take your security more seriously." At that point, enough was enough. We went to the actual police and filed a report. The officer was sympathetic, but there wasn't much they could do. The guy hadn't technically broken in. He hadn't taken anything, and there wasn't even any proof that he actually wrote the note. We put up cameras, changed all the locks just for peace of mind, but it didn't feel like enough. We didn't feel safe there anymore. Within a few months, we put the place back up on the market and took the financial hit just to get out of there. On moving day, the new owners showed up. Another young couple, maybe late 20s, early 30s like us. We warned them, just said there was a neighbor who was a little too into the whole neighborhood watch thing and to be careful. They laughed, just like we had at first. About a week later, our realtor shot us a text that said, "Hey, do you guys know someone who might have had a key to your old place?" A guy came by and dropped one off with the new owners. He told them it belonged to you and to say hi for him. We never replied. This happened when I was about 16, so we're talking early 90s or so. I was babysitting a neighborhood girl named Olivia for the summer. Her parents lived just a few houses down from mine in a chill, stereotypical neighborhood cul-de-sac. The kind of boring place you've seen a million times in movies where nothing ever really happens. Just summer heat, sprinklers, and the sound of lawnmowers. Olivia was 7 or so, I think, at the time. Just a super sweet and outgoing kid, which makes this story all the more disturbing and heartbreaking for me. Most days we'd do crafts or go to the park or just melt into the couch watching cartoons. It wasn't exciting, but it was easy money. One afternoon while I was walking her back from the park, we took a route we normally wouldn't and ended up on the other side of the neighborhood from where we lived. It wasn't like an enormous, endlessly sprawling suburbia, but it was large enough of a neighborhood that this wasn't familiar territory for me. I'd been over that way only maybe a few other times as long as I'd lived there. Nevertheless, I noticed something strange. As we entered the neighborhood, in the backyard of a house that had always looked kind of dark and overgrown, an older guy was setting up what looked like a homemade carnival. Like a bounce house, a table with a popcorn machine, some beanbag games, and even handmade signs with cartoon drawings and balloons. It was honestly actually kind of impressive and completely unexpected. Later that day, homemade flyers started showing up on everyone's doorsteps. The flyer said it was a birthday party for the guy's niece, and all the neighborhood kids were welcome to stop by. Obviously, all the kids in the neighborhood were totally intrigued by this, and Olivia begged her parents for permission to let me take her. Both of them worked during the daytime and couldn't go themselves, so they reluctantly agreed. So, we went the next day around noon. Because of the timing, it seemed like a lot of the kids didn't have parents with them supervising. Some of them had older children with them, cousins or siblings chaperoning them. But a bunch of them were straight up unsupervised. And other than that, there were like a few adults floating around. All I can really say is, it was weird. Not scary necessarily, just off. The bounce house was like faded and sagging to one side. The popcorn tasted like chemicals. The guy who set it up was way too enthusiastic. He had dressed up as a clown and made balloon animals and handed out lollipops, laughing way too hard at everything the kids said. And the balloon animals were terrible. I remember watching him do it. He would just make a random shape and then try to convince whatever kid he was giving it to that it was such and such an animal. And he kept snapping Polaroids. but never facing the kids or like kids were their parents or whatever. It was always from like behind or the side or at a distance. It was always at a weird time when he wasn't being looked at. You'd just see the flash go off from somewhere nearby and hear the thing spit out a photo, and by the time you turned around, he was putting it into his pocket. At one point, Olivia ran off to play with some of the other kids near the bounce house, which was located next to the guy's back door. While she was playing around with her friends, I approached one of the few adults there who I knew, a guy who volunteered at my school's soccer games. I chatted with him for a few minutes. He asked how my parents were, and I asked if he knew what the photos were being taken for. He said the guy told him they were for his niece's birthday scrapbook, but that he wasn't sure which kid was his niece. I got caught up in talking with him, and maybe 5 to 10 minutes had gone by when suddenly I heard crying. I turned and saw Olivia. She was running back toward me from the direction of the guy's back door, followed by the guy who was hosting the carnival, the clown. Olivia immediately clung on to me and wouldn't say anything, just kept sobbing like she was terrified. The guy said she had fallen, but there were no visible injuries on her and her clothes had no grass stains or dirt marks or anything. The whole thing was extremely off and awkward. Like, when I turned and saw her, it almost looked like she came running out of his house. It was at that point that we left. Later that night, I casually mentioned it to my parents. They said the whole thing sounded odd, but probably harmless. I couldn't decide if I agreed. 2 days later, Olivia's mom called me asking questions about the carnival. I guess Olivia, who had been such an outgoing and sociable kid, had suddenly, since the carnival, become completely withdrawn and almost catatonic. I walked over and her mom brought me up to her room to see if I could talk to her and find out any more about what had happened. In her room, I found Olivia curled up in her bed, staring at the wall. We had had a really good relationship up to that point, and it was so unlike her. She refused to speak to me. She just laid there with her eyes open, sucking her thumb and not saying anything. Now, I know for a fact nothing happened while I was physically with her at the carnival, but my mind circled back to the period of time, the maybe 5 to 10 minutes where I took my eyes off of her when she ran off to play with the other kids while I spoke to the adult that I knew. I couldn't help but wonder what had happened. Knowing there was this chunk of unaccounted for time in my supervision of her hit me like a punch in the gut. The next afternoon, I walked to the carnival house, but when I got there, the yard was completely empty. No bounce house, no tent, no signs, just dents in the grass where the equipment had been. The house looked completely dark and lifeless. The whole place looked dead. I knocked, but no one answered. As I was standing there, a neighbor from across the street, an older woman watering her plants, was giving me this weird look. She called out and asked if I needed something. I said I was looking for the man who had had the carnival here a few days ago. She looked confused and asked what I was talking about. I walked over to her and explained the whole story to her. I guess she had been traveling and returned home that very morning, so she had no clue. She then told me that nobody had been living in that house for almost half a year. I told Olivia's mom everything. She called the police, who checked the house but didn't find anything. No signs of recent activity, no record of anyone living there under the name the man gave out on the flyers. They wrote it off as some weird misunderstanding. Sadly, that basically brought an end to my relationship with that family. I think I really lost credibility in their eyes after that, and they ended up changing sitters. To this day, I have so much regret and guilt about taking my attention off of her, and my only hope is that nothing more than a simple fall took place in that house. I used to work part-time at a clothing store in our local mall. Not like high-end or anything, more of a discount fashion place where people go to find marked-down brand names. I think I must have been about 19 when this happened. Still living at home, trying to save some money while figuring out what I wanted to do after high school. It definitely wasn't a long-term thing, but the job wasn't bad. Pretty quiet most of the time, a lot of older ladies, moms with kids, sometimes teenagers shopping for school, and we had a few regulars. The fitting rooms were the worst part, not because of the customers, but because it was a total blind spot. No cameras, no real supervision. People could walk in with 5 things, come out with 2, and unless you were really on it, you'd miss it. You were supposed to count their items, but it got so busy sometimes that you'd just guess. Everyone did it. That's probably why it took me a couple weeks to really notice the guy. At a first glance, he looked harmless, or like vanilla is a better way of saying it. Probably mid-40s or so, tall but slouched, always wearing oversized sunglasses and a baseball cap. He came in a couple times a week, always during the day when it wasn't busy. He'd have a handful of women's clothes, dresses, blouses, sometimes even workout tights, and take them into the fitting room. To each their own, but what started to bother me was that he never actually bought anything. Never once. Just spent 20 or 30 minutes in there, then left without a word. Sometimes he'd put the clothes back on the return rack, other times I'd find them stuffed behind the bench in the corner. I mentioned it to my supervisor, but she was just kind of whatever about it. Said as long as he wasn't stealing from the store, there wasn't much we could do. Later that same week, I saw him again. This time, he had a couple lingerie pieces, bras and underwear, but they weren't ours. We didn't sell that stuff. That's when I realized he was bringing in his own stuff to try on. I tried to talk to him, just small talk, asked if he needed help finding anything. He barely acknowledged me, just nodded and ducked into the stall. The whole thing creeped me out, but again, what could I do? He wasn't breaking the law, not technically, and management didn't want to scare off a paying customer even though he never bought anything. Then came the weekend. It was a Saturday right before back to school, so we were slammed. I was at the fitting room desk when I heard someone shout. A woman, maybe late 20s, came storming out of one of the stalls. She was shaking and like traumatized. She said someone had been watching her from underneath the partition. She'd seen fingers, actual fingers, curling under the bottom edge, trying to lift her curtain. Then she looked down and saw an eye. She had screamed, went to run out, but the bra she'd taken off was gone. Total chaos. People were shouting, kids crying. I radioed for security and we started clearing the fitting rooms. All of them were empty, except one, locked from the inside. We knocked, no answer. You could hear rustling inside, shuffling. We called again, nothing. Mall security came and tried to talk the person out. Still no response. So we called the actual police. When they finally opened the door, I felt sick. It was the same guy. He was crouched in the corner, fully dressed in mismatched women's clothing. A skirt that didn't fit, a tank top stretched too tight and that we didn't even sell, badly applied lipstick, a cheap tangled wig, and women's underwear. Nobody knew what to do. It was so out of left field that we all just stood there for a second, taking it in. The guy was just looking at them, and then in this fake lady voice started trying to play it off like he was just trying on clothes or something. They dragged him out of there and found a tote bag under the bench. Inside were several pairs of underwear with the tags ripped off. One of them was the missing bra. There were also a few other pieces that weren't from our store. One had a name written in marker on the tag, probably from a gym or dorm or something. He was arrested. Everyone just stood there watching as they walked him out, still wearing that same lipstick like he didn't have a care in the world. Later, we found out he wasn't charged with much, trespassing and maybe petty theft. The woman didn't press charges. I guess she just wanted to forget it happened. Our boss had a meeting about it the next day, told us to be more vigilant about the fitting rooms, said we should trust our instincts, which felt like a joke considering how many times we had brought it up. He didn't come back, at least not while I was working there. It's been a long time since then, but I still find it so disturbing how he tried to play it off, and how casual he was about all of it. Like he really didn't think that he'd done anything wrong. I'm from a rural state in the Midwest. When I was in my 20s, I picked up a night shift job at a gas station just off the highway. It wasn't part of a chain or anything, just kind of a beat-up, old-school spot. A couple pumps, a literal flickering sign, and a comically always broken ice machine. My shift was 6 p.m. to 2 a.m. Not my favorite hours, but it was a job, and I needed it. So I worked with this lady, whose name, for the sake of the story, I'll say was Deb. Late 50s, maybe early 60s, white hair pulled into a ponytail, glasses, smoker. She didn't talk much, but it wasn't like she was rude or anything, just kind of quiet and maybe a little moody or gruff. She knew where everything was, never messed up a register count, and clearly had been doing the job for a long time. Most nights were slow. Truckers passing through, sketchy locals grabbing cigarettes or beer or whatever, and a few stoned teenagers loading up on gas station snacks. Time always crawled, and everyone had a story you didn't want to hear. Anyway, after a few weeks, I started to pick up on something strange. Deb acted differently around certain customers. Always men. Always the ones traveling alone. Guys who looked like they were maybe a little more well-off than the average working-class Joe you'd otherwise see in the area. She'd lean forward a little more, was friendlier, asked them questions she didn't ask anyone else. She was able to get information out of these guys without them really realizing it. Maybe because they were lonely or something, I don't know. Questions like, where you headed tonight? You drive this route often? Staying nearby or passing through? To them, it must have seemed like she did this with everybody, or maybe she was flirting or something. But from my perspective, I could see they had no idea that she was, like, selecting them. She'd smile like it was all just small talk, but it never felt casual. It felt like deliberate, or targeted is maybe a better word. Then, while she rang them up, she'd scribble stuff down on a yellow notepad she kept by the till. I didn't really know what to think. My best guess was that this was either something for the accounting demographics or something, or maybe even that she was the lonely one and wanted to find someone. But one night, I saw her glance out the window at this guy's car, then clearly write down his license plate number. Once he was gone, she tore the note off and slipped it into her pocket. I asked her about it, just kind of joked if she was keeping tabs on people. She didn't look at me, just replied that some faces are worth remembering or something like that. The whole thing was weird, but whatever. Some people collect bugs and I don't understand that either. So I forgot about it. A few days later though, another guy came in. Looked like he did all right for himself. She chatted with him too. Asked where he was from, where he was staying, if he was working nearby. Same deal, a quiet scribble, a paper in the pocket. That time, after he left, she stayed at the register for a minute or so, then went into the back office, closed the door for a few minutes, and came back out. I know it doesn't sound like it should be that strange of a thing to do, but you have to trust me that this literally never happened, except to do like stuff for the books, and now was definitely not the time for that. Nothing about it sat right with me. Like at a certain point, what the hell is this behavior? If I was a customer and knew an employee at a random gas station was writing down my personal information, I'd be sketched out. So I started paying more attention. A week or two later, it happened again, but worse. This odd guy came in late at night, bought a coffee and a scratch ticket. I caught Deb slipping something under the counter to him. It looked like a folded note or a list. He nodded, didn't say but a word, and walked out. His vehicle was a dark van, no visible logos, couldn't catch the plates. I had been in the middle of stocking a shelf when it happened, so as she turned and saw me watching, I could tell in her face that she hadn't expected me to see her pass this guy the piece of paper. She kind of halted up and then turned around looking for something to do as a cover, but didn't have anything, so she just kind of leaned against the counter awkwardly. It was super tense and obvious to me that she was uncomfortable knowing I had seen her do whatever she had done. A couple minutes went by when she just calmly walked into the back office once again and shut the door. This time, I went up next to the door and tried to listen. She was on the phone with someone. I couldn't hear much, but I definitely caught the sentence, "No, I'm telling you, she saw." That was enough for me. My shift ended shortly thereafter. I played it cool until I got in my car and tried to calm down. Maybe it was nothing, I don't know what the hell it was, but that voice in the back of my head wouldn't shut up that something wasn't right. About 10 minutes into the drive home, I saw headlights in my rearview mirror. Mind you, this is in the middle of the night in the rural-ass Midwest. I was so caught up in my head going over what that lady could be doing that I didn't think much of it until I turned off the main road, and the other vehicle turned too. It stayed with me. No plate on the front, dark van. I turned again. It followed. Finally, I just punched it, got ahead, and found another way back onto the main road going the opposite direction and drove straight to the parking lot of the nearest police substation. I didn't even get out, just parked under a floodlight next to the building and looked in the rearview mirror. That same van appeared, slowed down at the edge of the lot, then it turned and disappeared down a side street. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. My adrenaline was just surging. The next day, I called in sick, and then I never went back. Didn't even ask for my last check, just stopped. No one called to ask why. Months later, I was visiting my mom and stopped at the station to fill up. Everything looked the same. Same ice machine, same dusty candy rack. Deb wasn't there. Some teenage kid I didn't know stood behind the counter. I asked if Deb still worked there. He didn't know who I was talking about. He was able to get my last check for me out of the office, and after that, I never went back again. I had a really rough time for a few years. I won't get too into the personal details, but it was a bad stretch for me. I started working at this charity store after I got laid off from my previous job. Mid-30s, no degree, and too much pride to move back in with my mom. The place was a charity-run spot, half Goodwill, half local shelter affiliate. Think retirees shopping for knickknacks and people trying to stretch a dollar. They stuck me in the back. My main job was sorting out the donation chute. This place was unique because it had a chute that was directly connected to the side of the building. People could drive up, dump stuff in this big metal hatch on the side of the building, and it would slide down into a locked sorting room. My job was to empty it out a few times a day, sometimes overnight, then move stuff to the main inventory shelves and toss out the junk. And we got a lot of junk. Old, stained magazines and books, busted microwaves, shoes with holes worn through. Things nobody else would ever want. Most of it was harmless, until it wasn't. A few weeks in, I opened a bag and found a used adult diaper. No attempt to wrap it up, just in there. I could not believe it. I gagged, tossed it, and moved on. The next day, a bundle of bed sheets with dried brown stains all over them. Another day, a child's t-shirt that was stiff and crusted in places. Some spots on it looked reddish. I explained it all to my manager, who basically shrugged it off and told me that I wouldn't believe how many people treat the donation chute like their own personal trash disposal, and just to toss the stuff and not overthink it. So I did, until the day I opened the bag and found a sealed Ziploc with several adult human teeth. Old, yellowed, cracked. Some still had roots. That time, my manager agreed it was messed up enough to call the cops. Officer came by, took the bag, jotted down some notes, but that was the end of it. He didn't seem worried. Surveillance did not cover the chute directly, just the lot where people parked, and even then, only part of it. Days passed, things were normal. About a week later, somebody called out and I was bumped to the overnight shift. They were behind on donations after some local church drive, and the shoot room was backed up. It wasn't that big of a deal, and honestly, I needed the hours. Everyone else left around 8. I was the only one in the building. The back lot was already dark. The shoot room was quiet except for me rustling through plastic bags and the rare metallic creak from the chute. I remember I was crouched directly beneath the chute, trying to untangle a clump of half-split garbage bags that had jammed the lower track, when I heard it. This sudden, sliding sound above me. I looked up, thinking I was about to dodge a garbage bag when I saw it. An arm reaching down through the chute toward me. This nasty, white, veiny arm, elbow barely fitting through the square opening, hand clawing through the air trying to get at me. Whoever this was had literally been waiting outside for a chance to grab me and was now desperately trying to force themselves down the chute to get at me. I literally fell on my ass and was trying to squeeze myself against the floor as small as possible to not get mauled by this person. Then, a face pressed into the thing. It was a dude with these terrified, drugged out eyes. He was making this aggressive, horrible, wet sound like sucking and lip smacking. I cannot tell you how horrifying and disgusting this was. What made it even scarier was that it was the only sound besides his arm flailing around and banging against the sides of the chute. I pushed out from under the chute, got up, slammed the chute room door shut, locked it, and called the police from the front. But by the time they searched the lot, of course, whoever it was had gotten the hell out of there. They were useless, didn't tell me anything I didn't already know. Probably a homeless guy, probably mentally ill or on drugs or both. No shit. The kids' clothes and the sheets and the diaper, it was completely fucked, and to me, felt connected. The manager had a lock installed on the inside chute hatch the next day. He also put up a no donations after dark sign. He took mercy on me and stopped scheduling me in the back room altogether. I took more front register shifts, and soon thereafter was able to get another job closer to the field I currently work in. I ended up running into him at a bar months later. He told me that the guy that got put on nights after me ended up quitting too. And when I heard why, I knew I had made the right decision. He said he had been working in there by himself and had heard breathing coming through the chute. That was all I needed to hear. Things can happen to you when you're young that will change you forever. You may not know it at the time, but one day, when you're older looking back, you can finally see how badly it warped you. This experience left me scarred, and I will never not sleep in my own bed again. I went to a sleepover at my friend's house when we were in middle school. Her parents were out of town for the night. It was like a family emergency, I think, something about her uncle. I remember being pretty surprised that they left her alone, but I guess we were old enough and they needed to travel out of town as soon as possible. We spent most of the night doing normal stuff. Junk food, face masks, watching dumb comedies. It was just the two of us, and it felt fun in that way that sleepovers do when you feel like you have the whole house to yourselves. The only downer was how often my friend kept checking her phone. She'd giggle and type something, then smirk like she was in on some inside joke. Eventually, she told me that I might meet her boyfriend later. I didn't think that much of it. I knew of her boyfriend, but I'd never met him, even though she talked about him constantly. He was older than us and in high school. I figured she meant he might call or FaceTime or something. But then she started getting a little weird. Like, she'd look at her phone all concerned and then walk over to check the window through the blinds. At one point, she even made me help check out the blinds too, and when I asked what the problem was, all she said was she was making sure nobody was out there. I thought she was joking, like maybe she was trying to creep me out. She also had a tendency to be dramatic. Around 1 a.m., we were dozing off in the living room. The TV was still on, but the sound was low. I remember I was half asleep, just barely aware of the screen still flickering in the dark. That's when someone started pounding on the back door. Not knocking, pounding. My friend bolted upright and whispered that it was probably her boyfriend. She looked excited for a second and jumped up to go to the kitchen, but then the pounding got more frantic. It wasn't like someone messing around. It sounded urgent, like someone desperately trying to get inside. My friend froze. Even she was like, this was definitely not part of the program. She yelled out through the door, asking who it was, and from the other side, this muffled male voice called back that it was her boyfriend. She peeked through the little curtain on the side of the door, then unlocked it and let him in. This guy stumbled in, slamming the door shut and locking it behind him. His shirt was streaked with blood. He was pale and out of breath, just standing there, not saying anything at first. My friend whispered to him, asking if he was okay, and reached out to him. But before she could connect with him, his eyes were darting around the room, and he was telling us that we had to turn off the lights and hide. That someone was following him. He then started walking around the house and turning off all the lights and making sure everything was locked. I didn't know what to do. He didn't look messed up in like a drug sense, but something was off. He was shaking, his hands were twitchy, and he kept glancing over his shoulder like he expected someone else to come barreling through the door. My friend and I just stood there, unsure what we should be doing. Then he made us go upstairs, and we followed him down the hall into her room where he told us to get in the closet and not to talk and not to move. We crammed into the closet, all three of us. The only light was from the outside street lamp coming in through the bedroom window, and you could barely see anything through the closet door slats. He wasn't calm. He kept whispering and muttering stuff like, "I think I lost him," and "he won't find us." I didn't know what to believe. Was someone actually after him? Did he do something to somebody else? Was he high? All I knew was that I didn't want to be there anymore. We just sat there, crammed in the closet in silence. Then we heard it. From downstairs, someone knocking on the back door. Then, nothing. Nobody said anything. I was so scared I thought I was going to have a heart attack. Silence. We must have stayed in there for over an hour, not saying anything. Then, her boyfriend got a text on his phone. I don't know what it said, but it lit up the closet when he checked it, and we heard a car pull up outside. We heard the engine and the tires on gravel. He got up, opened the closet, ran out of the room and downstairs. We heard him walk through the first floor and open the back door. Then he shouted up to my friend that he would call her later and that he was locking the door behind him and closing it. Then the door shut and he left. Then we heard the car speed off. After that, it was quiet. The two of us didn't leave the closet. We brought in pillows and blankets and stayed in there until the sun started to rise. Her boyfriend didn't come back or call her. He was just gone. I went home later that morning and never spent the night at her house again. I never found out what happened with her boyfriend either, but I still remember how scared I was when I looked at his face that night. I was never told who he was running from or why, or who knocked on the door. And that was enough to scare the hell out of me. This happened on a super humid night when I was like 12 or 13. I was at my friend's house for a backyard sleepover. Just me, him, and another kid from our grade. My friend's parents were the kind that didn't care what we did as long as we were safe and did it on their property. And they didn't care how late we stayed up as long as we weren't being loud or bothering the neighbors. His dad especially had a weird sense of humor. He loved pulling little pranks and was actually a pretty funny guy. He felt almost more like a friend than a parent. I remember once he jumped out from behind the couch in a werewolf mask and made my friend's cousin cry, which we all thought was hilarious at the time. All of this is to say that when weird stuff started happening that night, we just kind of assumed it was him. We were out in this old tent that smelled like dust and plastic, set up in his backyard. The yard was nothing huge, a shed, a couple skinny trees, and patchy grass. There was nothing particularly special about it, but it did have one of those motion lights on the back of the house that clicked on if you got too close. It felt like we were in our own little world back there. At probably around 10 p.m., we were joking around and playing Would You Rather. Then, out of nowhere, we saw the motion light from the back porch click on. We all went silent for a second, waiting for his dad to tell us to be quiet. But he didn't. So we thought it was either a glitch or an animal or something that had triggered it. Then it clicked back off and we kept talking. Then, out of nowhere, the tent started shaking. Hard. Someone had grabbed it and was yanking it from side to side as fast as they could, and pressing down on the sides of it almost to the point where they were physically touching us through the fabric. For a second, it was so intense I thought they might even rip through the side of the thing. We started screaming. Then, the shaking just stopped completely, and there was the sound of feet running away. Then, just dead quiet. A few seconds later, the back door to the house creaked open and the motion light popped back on. My friend's dad called out to us, asking us if we were okay and to try to keep it down. We all just laughed, kind of nervously. Of course it was him. Who else would do something like that? We yelled back that we thought it was funny and that we were fine, and the tension eased. Then we heard him shut the back door and the light turned back off. We settled back in, heart still racing but trying to act cool about it. We talked for a bit longer, but eventually things started to go quiet. Both of my friends seemed to have passed out, but I couldn't really sleep because it was so humid. I tossed and turned, and a little while later I had to pee. I got out of my sleeping bag, unzipped the tent, and stepped out quietly. The air had cooled down a bit, but everything felt damp. I walked over toward the shed where there was this little patch of dirt no one really used. While I was standing there, about to pee, I noticed something. I literally saw the figure of a person crouched just behind the far side of the shed. At first, I thought it was just a shadow, but then the shape moved, like someone shifting their weight. It was a human figure, squatting, clearly trying not to be seen. I just stood there. Then I thought, okay, it's just his dad still screwing with us. At the same time, I thought it was weird that he would be out here squatting behind the shed just for the sake of a joke. I tried to break the tension by telling him that he got us earlier and that we were really scared. But the shape didn't move, didn't laugh, didn't say anything. It was just me and this figure at the edge of the property in the dark in the stillness of the night, not saying anything. There is nothing more awkward or strange than telling someone who you know is hiding that you see them, that the gig is up, but they continue to commit to it. I stood there for maybe 5 more seconds, then I turned around and walked back to the tent. That's when the backyard light flicked on again, and I reflexively looked over at the house. Through the upstairs window, I could see my friend's dad in the bathroom, light on, brushing his teeth. My body went cold, like actual cold, like I could feel the heat just drain out of me. I stood there like a stone. I slowly turned around to look at the shed, which was now lit up by the backyard light. But right as I laid eyes on it, the light went out again. Then I heard someone running at a full sprint away from the shed and off through their driveway. I immediately got back in the tent and woke my friends up to tell them what happened. We all went back in the house after that and slept inside. His dad even looked around the property for us but didn't find anything. In the morning, they all told me that they thought I was either pranking them or seeing things. But I know what I saw, or at least I know what I didn't see. I didn't see his dad outside. There was someone back there, and whoever it was wasn't supposed to be there. I went to a sleepover once at my buddy's house. The plan was to do a scary movie marathon and try to stay up all night. This was back before streaming services and all that. It was a Friday night and his parents were out. That wasn't super unusual. They trusted him and he was pretty responsible. His older brother was just out of high school, if I remember correctly, and he also wasn't around. We figured he was at a party or staying over at his girlfriend's place. We hung out in the basement, drank Mountain Dew, and watched back-to-back scary movies. We had rented some, but my buddy's brother also had a ton of horror tapes in his room, which he collected. We went upstairs and snuck into his room to grab a few. Most of them were in their original tape cases. Some were bare but still had the original label on them, and some were just bootlegs where he'd written the titles on a white label sticker with a Sharpie. One tape near the bottom of the bunch just had a number written on it, like a time code as the title. I remember we took that one and two others from the collection and went back downstairs. Back in the basement, we watched two of the movies. The first was a cheesy monster movie that wasn't even scary, just gross and dumb. The second was an old slasher type with terrible acting but decent effects. A little past midnight, we popped in the mystery tape. It was like another 70s low-budget scary movie we had never heard of. Washed out colors, slow dialogue, and synth music. It wasn't great, but we left it on as background noise. Then, the movie just suddenly cut out. The screen flickered. It went to static, and we thought the tape had broken or something. My friend got up and fast-forwarded it to see if it was all just a total wash, but a few seconds later, a new scene came on. It was confusing at first because it looked completely different than the movie we'd been watching. We thought there might have been a mistake and someone had accidentally recorded a different movie over the original one partway through. But then we realized it wasn't an actual movie. It was shaky handheld footage, like from a camcorder. It was from the perspective of someone walking down a dark alley. No music or sound design, no credits, no setup, nothing. Just the sound of shoes on wet pavement. Then, the camera turned a corner and pointed at a man, presumably homeless, sitting against a dumpster under a streetlight behind a building. He looked half asleep or maybe drunk. The camera just filmed him for a minute, and we started joking about what the hell this was when suddenly the camera rushed toward him. It happened fast. There was shouting and a scuffle, and then the camera jolted from side to side. You couldn't see much at all, but the sounds were awful, real, like someone getting hit hard over and over and screaming. Then it just ended and immediately cut back to the original movie we had been watching. For a second, none of us moved. Then, one of the guys said we should tell someone. My buddy, who was hosting, shook his head and said no, and that we needed to put the tape back exactly where we had found it. We rewound it and snuck it back upstairs, back in his brother's room. After that, the night was off. We went back to the basement and tried watching other stuff, but no one was laughing. We barely talked. Then, around 2 or 3 in the morning, we heard the garage door open. His brother was home. We heard him come into the house and walk around upstairs, keys jingling and the fridge opening. Then we heard him go upstairs to his room. There was silence. And then we heard him come back out of his room, come down the stairs, walk toward the basement door, and stop just outside of it. No knocking, no coming down, just standing there, listening. Then, footsteps walking away, back upstairs, and his bedroom door closing. None of us said anything the rest of the night. I called my mom early the next morning and asked her to come pick me up. Told her I wasn't feeling well. I didn't talk to my buddy for a while after that, and we never brought it up again. I don't know if the others ever said anything, and I have no idea if his brother knew we watched the tape. I still wonder where that footage came from, though. Who filmed it? One thing I do know is that the time written on the front of the tape wasn't the title. It was the time code where the messed up footage started, so that whoever had filmed it could watch it again and again, whenever they wanted. People will tell you that monsters aren't real, that there's always a reasonable explanation and anything else is just fiction. But I know different. I know what I saw with my own eyes, and I know I'll never go back in those woods again. This happened when I was a senior in high school. And before you get all turned off by the fact that this happened when I was young, I promise you I'm not exaggerating a thing. This is a real thing that really happened to me, and this is not some little kid afraid of his own shadow BS. I was messing around with this dirt bike I picked up off Facebook Marketplace for like $300. It was my first proper bike, so I didn't mind having a bit of a beater to thrash around on. It barely ran, but I'd been working on it after school for a few weeks and finally got it to hold together long enough to take it out for a decent ride. There's this stretch of woods near where I live. It's technically state land, but no one really goes out there unless they're hunting or drinking. It's deep and dark and has this do not enter vibe to it. I knew I probably shouldn't be riding through it, but I figured it was a weekday afternoon, the weather was decent, and no one was going to be out there enforcing it. I cut through a few side trails and ended up in this dry ravine I'd never noticed before. The bike was handling like crap, and the terrain started to get so sketchy that I honestly thought I might wreck and hurt myself in the middle of nowhere. So I killed the engine and got off to walk it a bit. When I got to the end of the ravine, I saw this weird-looking slope, like a man-made berm, and at the base of it was this tunnel. It looked like a storm drain, but it wasn't marked or fenced off or anything, just a round, concrete hole about 4 feet high with trash and beer cans scattered around the entrance. I got down level with the opening, walked the bike up close to it, and turned on my bike's headlight, pointing it in to get a better look. There was some graffiti on the inside walls, which wasn't surprising, but what did surprise me was the middle of the tunnel. It was clean. Like no trash, no leaves, no mud buildup, just a clean, worn path leading straight into the darkness. It looked used, like people had been going in and out a lot. It was dumb, I know, but my curiosity got the better of me. I left the bike and walked up to the entrance. Just a few steps inside and this odor hit me immediately, like cold old concrete and wet leaves. The light from my bike didn't extend very far in at all. I couldn't see past maybe 30 feet at the maximum, and it just faded to pitch black beyond that. Then I heard it. A scrape. Just one, very distinctly, like something shifted against the floor or wall farther in. Not an echo, not a rat skittering, not rocks or stone. Something large enough to make a single, dry, distinct dragging sound. And then, stillness. I didn't want to move. I didn't want to make any sound. My brain tried to logic it away. Maybe a possum, maybe water somehow. But my gut knew something was different. I can't even remember what I said because I started panicking. I think I just called out something dumb like, hello, and then stood there like an idiot, waiting for a response I didn't actually want or expect. Nothing. No movement, no sound. I started to take a step back, and that's when it happened. At the edge of the bike's light reach, just barely in view, dipping low as it moved, something crossed the tunnel from one side to the other. Not walked, not crawled, moved on all fours, low to the ground. No noise, no snarl, just this quick flurry of limbs and what I'm convinced was some kind of face crossing through the weak beam of light. Maybe it was because it was brief, maybe it was because it was dark, but I swear to you, something about that face looked human. And the limbs were not hairy, it was just like skin. It took me so by surprise that I instinctively stumbled backward and almost fell down. At that point, there was no trying to be discreet anymore. I hauled it out of the tunnel, tripping over the little incline on the way out, and scrambled to my bike. I got on, tried to start it, planning on getting some distance between me and the tunnel, even at the risk of losing control. And of course, the starter wouldn't catch. I was full on panicking, attempting again and again to start the bike, trying not to look back, but also expecting to see something or someone crawling out of that tunnel any second. That's when I just started sprinting the bike away from the mouth of it. I ran it all the way back to the trail. Nothing followed me, but there was no doubt in my mind that something had been watching me. I kept cranking the starter until finally it turned over. I revved it and ripped it the hell out of there, bouncing over roots and brush, not even caring if I crashed. I just needed distance. When I got home, I looked on Google Maps and tried to find that ravine or the tunnel entrance. No marked drain, no sign of it even existing, just trees. I haven't gone back to that part of the forest since, and I never will again. This was years ago at this point, and it was so upsetting you can bet I still think about it at least once a week. I'm in my 60s now, and a while back, after going through a drawn-out divorce, I decided I needed a break from people. I've been into primitive camping most of my life, so I figured I'd head up to northern Maine for a solo trip. Just me, my gear, a good book, and a few days of silence. I chose an area I had camped in once before, but a long time ago. We're talking maybe 10 years earlier. It wasn't an official campsite, no fire ring, no outhouse, nothing like that. Just a flat clearing maybe 10 minutes off a barely maintained dirt road, which itself was about 20 miles off the main highway. Up until that point, I had never had any issues camping on my own. But in the back of my mind, I knew that at my age I needed to be careful, because if something went wrong, it wasn't like I could call for help. There's genuinely no signal out there, and that was the point. But something did go wrong. Very wrong. I parked my truck in a little pull-off, hiked in with my pack, and set up camp next to a narrow creek. I was actually surprised I was even able to find my way back to the general area where I had camped before. I half expected to get out there and have no idea where I was. The setup was nothing grand. Small tent, single burner stove, water filter, the usual. It was fall, early October, and I remember being grateful for the cold. No bugs, no people, no kids, and I didn't have to worry about bears as much. I spent most of that first day collecting wood and walking the area to get my bearings. I cooked some dinner, read for a while by headlamp, and crawled into my sleeping bag around 9. The kind of day that feels like it resets your brain. Dead quiet. Sometime in the night, I woke up to a sound. I've always been a light sleeper, and especially when I'm camping alone, I am hyper aware of my surroundings, particularly at night. At first, I thought it was an animal, maybe a deer or raccoon sniffing around my food bag, but after a few seconds, I realized the steps were too deliberate. It was not an animal. It was a person. Not clumsy either. careful, measured, like they were trying not to be heard. That was when I realized that I did not have any kind of weapon to defend myself with. Just the hatchet I'd left by the fire pit. My flashlight was inside the tent, but I was afraid to reach for it. At this point, the only advantage I thought I had was the fact that they might not know I was awake. I just laid there in my bag, holding my breath, listening. The footsteps stopped somewhere near the burnt-out fire, and I heard somebody pull the hatchet out of the log I had left it lodged in. There was like a 30-second silence, which doesn't sound like a lot, but in that situation, believe me, it goes on forever. Then, someone spoke. It was a man. He called out to me to get out of the tent, that they were not there to hurt me if I cooperated with them. The voice was maybe only 10 feet from my tent. Then another voice chimed in, farther away, and told me not to look at them or they would put the hatchet through the back of my head. I said nothing. The first voice spoke again, saying that he knew I could hear him and that they just wanted my stuff and my wallet, and that was all, and to leave it in the tent. Then he instructed me to step out slowly, raise my hands, and face away. At that point, I had to accept the fact that I had no recourse in the situation. I was a man in his mid-50s in the middle of the woods, trapped in a tent in my underwear without any way to defend myself. I did what they said. I unzipped the tent, stepped out barefoot into the cold, and turned away. I could hear them moving behind me, rustling through my pack and pants, unzipping stuff, clinking gear. One of them laughed quietly when they found something, but I don't know what. They took my wallet, my watch, my GPS, and some food. They didn't take everything. Left the stove, my sleeping bag, even my car keys, which I guess they hadn't found because I had stashed them in a pocket on the side of the tent. Then I heard them disappear into the trees. No flashlights, no conversation, just gone. I got dressed and packed up what things I had left. They had taken my GPS and I was not confident I could find my way back to my truck in the middle of the night without it. But I was not about to spend the rest of the night sitting there, so I risked it. By some miracle, I was able to find my way back out to the road and eventually to my truck. I drove the whole way home without stopping. I never called the police. What was I gonna say? I never saw them, no descriptions, no plates, and truthfully, I didn't want to deal with the paperwork or the questions. It was embarrassing more than anything else. I still camp, but I don't go alone anymore, and I carry now. Whatever that was, whoever they were, I got lucky, I know that. And I can't help but relive it every time I zip up a tent. For a while there, I was employed as a seasonal forest ranger for a state park in the Northwest. It was a late fall assignment and most of the park was empty by then. You'd get the occasional die-hard hikers or whatever, but nothing like the summer crowds. It was quiet and kind of peaceful in its own way. Also, this will be important later on, but I was born with a condition called congenital anosmia, which means I have no sense of smell. So anyway, this particular morning I was sent out solo to clean up a section of trail after a windstorm had rolled through a few days earlier. Just basic stuff, clearing branches, checking signage, making sure no trees were blown down across the path, and that it was safe to walk. The area I was covering was pretty remote, about a 45-minute hike in, not close to any campsites or picnic areas, just deep woods. I was about halfway through my loop when I noticed something off to the right side of the trail. It was maybe 30 feet back. I surprised myself that I had even seen it, but it was so white that it really stuck out against the rest of the forest floor. At first, I thought it might be a piece of trash, or maybe a mushroom, something pale sticking out from under a big wet pile of leaves. The closest description I could give it from where I was is like a wet latex glove, or like discarded bratwurst sausages or something. Obviously, this struck me as odd because I was so far from any campsites or day use areas. It wasn't unusual to find weird stuff after people cut through the woods, but this was such a random, remote place that it really stuck out to me. I stepped off the trail and walked toward it, crouching down to get a better look. That's when I was really at a loss for words. It was a waxy-looking hand, with curled fingers stiffly sticking up through the leaves. I thought it had to be fake, but the color was wrong. Too dull, too lifeless. Then I noticed the fingernails, real fingernails. The skin had that bruised, purplish tone that bodies get, like spoiled meat. Something terrible had happened here, and the storm must have uncovered it. I stood up and looked around. It was silent. I radioed it in as a possible shallow grave, gave the coordinates from the nearest trail marker, and requested park police and state troopers. As I was talking to dispatch, I started looking around more. That's when I realized the ground didn't look right. A few feet to the left, there was another weird mound of leaves, and beyond that, another. I stepped over to the nearest one and gently pushed back the top layer with a stick. There was a bare foot underneath. I didn't check the others. I told dispatch there were multiple remains, likely more than one body. They told me to stay put, but I didn't say anything back for a few seconds. I was looking around and suddenly aware of the silence in the woods. It was heavy, like I wasn't alone. Then I heard a sound, a stick snap. I looked in the direction of the sound, but the woods got so thick it was nearly impossible to see clearly any deeper than I already was. It was likely that I was just being paranoid, but I was not taking any chances. I whispered into the radio that I was leaving the area, told them I didn't feel safe. They didn't argue with me. I started walking back to the trail, not fast, not running, just steady, like nothing was wrong, trying to keep my feet as quiet as possible so I could hear any incoming sounds that might indicate I was being pursued. I kept my eyes moving. Every few feet I checked over my shoulder, but I never saw anything. I swear I could feel it though. By the time backup arrived, I was already back at the ranger station. I gave my report and they sent a full team out. They found 2.5 bodies, all spread out under leaf cover. No IDs on any of them, just body parts. No arrests were ever made that I know of, and nothing ever came of it, at least not that I was told. I've walked that trail so many times. I've seen so many people come and go, hike in and out. I can't help but question if I'd seen the person who did this. And when I stopped on that trail, how long I'd been standing there before I noticed. And because I couldn't smell it, had I not happened to look over when I did, I would probably have just walked right by. I know the bodies had been there for a while, so it doesn't make sense that somebody would still have been out there. But that feeling walking back, like eyes were on me, like someone could have been watching me the whole time, just a few steps deeper in the woods. Like I said, as far as I know, they never found out who did it. But someone was using that stretch of forest for something dark. And that morning, I was standing right in the middle of it. I may get called pessimistic, but if this experience taught me anything, it was to never trust other people again, especially on the internet. So about 6 years ago, I was between jobs and kind of desperate for cash. I was doing gig stuff, helping friends move, painting apartments, that sort of thing. My life was all over the place at the time, and I was a bit of a mess. One afternoon, I was scrolling Craigslist and saw a listing titled something like "Overnight Warehouse Work, Cash Daily." For those of you too young to know, Craigslist is like an online bulletin board where people from different local communities could post things they were selling, services they had to offer, job listings, etc. I don't think people really use it much anymore, but back then it was very useful. Anyway, the ad was vague, but I needed the money so bad I didn't care. It said the work was light and no experience was needed, and that you'd be paid in cash at the end of every shift. The only thing that poked out to me was a line that said, "Must be discreet and follow instructions." But otherwise, it was pretty generic. I sent a quick text with my name to the number in the ad and said I was available immediately. I got a reply back within an hour. No questions, no interview, just an address to an industrial park a couple towns over, and a note that told me to show up at 9 p.m. It was a little cryptic, yeah, but I didn't have a lot of options. I showed up that night. The building was a squat, gray warehouse behind a chain-link fence. No signs or logos. There were a few other guys standing around outside, maybe 4 or 5 of us total. All different ages, but the same vibe. Quiet, head-down types. No one really talked. A little after 9, a guy came out and waved us in. He didn't introduce himself. Inside, we were told to leave our phones in a metal locker near the entrance, and that it was their standard safety procedure, and then they requested all of our IDs for paperwork. The work itself was pretty simple. Move boxes from a stack at the back of the warehouse onto a pallet jack, roll it to the front, and load them into unmarked white vans. The boxes were taped shut. No markings, no barcodes, just plain brown cardboard boxes. Nobody said what was in them, and nobody asked. The vans came in on this tight schedule, like one every 30 minutes, driven by different people every time. No company logos, no paperwork, nothing. Now look, if you're paying me, unless it's something really messed up that can hurt someone or get me in trouble, I don't really care. I just want to get paid and get out, but something kept tugging at me about it. On my 3rd night, I finally got paired up moving pallets with another guy who seemed halfway normal. He was maybe in his mid-50s, looked like a union guy who'd fallen on hard times. We didn't talk much, just kept pace. But at some point, during a break, he leaned against the wall and asked me, low enough that no one else could hear, if I'd ever seen inside one of the boxes. I told him no, and that I didn't really want to. He nodded, like he was deciding whether or not to keep going. Then, he told me that on one of his, the tape wasn't sealed right. The corner popped up when he lifted it, and that he wasn't sure exactly what he saw, but it looked like, and right then he stopped mid-sentence. One of the guys who always stood off to the side during our shifts was suddenly walking straight toward us. You could tell that the guy I was working with saw him too, because he went quiet and stared off like he was just zoning out. The dude came up to us and told my coworker he needed his help working on something else. The guy I'd been working with didn't even ask why. He just nodded and followed. They went through a plain gray door near the back, one I hadn't noticed before. It didn't look like an office, more like a storage room. A minute later, I heard something. Not a scream exactly, just this sharp noise, like something getting slammed into metal. Then, only one of them came back out, the guy who had been standing and watching us. I kept working, but I didn't see that coworker again for the rest of the shift. No one mentioned him either. When we were wrapped up for the night, they handed us our usual cash envelopes at the door, and I almost didn't take mine. I just wanted to leave. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about what he'd said, rather, what he'd almost said. I decided then and there I wasn't going back. I wasn't going to ask questions either. I was just going to say thanks but no thanks and be done with it. The next morning, I sent a message to the number that first contacted me. Appreciate the work, but I've got something else lined up, won't be in anymore. No reply. Later that day, as I was getting ready to go out and apply at a nearby restaurant, there was a knock at my door. When I opened it, there was nobody there, just a manila envelope laying on the step. No postage, no writing. I opened it right there without going back inside. Inside was just a piece of paper with a scan of my ID on it. And below that, all of my personal information written in a list. Name, address, and shit nobody else would have any way of knowing, like the names of my family members and their addresses and immediate family members' names. Underneath it was a little quote that said, "The stupid like to talk, but the wise know to listen." I walked the note straight out to the dumpster, stuffed my backpack full of my things, and left. I didn't go back that night. I stayed at a friend's place across town. A week later, I switched apartments, different lease, different neighborhood. I juiced all the money I made during that gig in the process, but I didn't care. I changed my phone number too. Anything I could think of to distance myself. I've never heard from that number since. I got no idea what was in those boxes, and I don't want to know, frankly. I checked Craigslist for weeks afterwards, and there was nothing. The ad was gone, like the job never even existed. Whatever operation that was, it wasn't just shady, it was something else. And I don't know what might have happened to me if I'd stuck around just one more day. I moved to a new city last year for work. I didn't know anyone and I didn't have a ton of money saved up, so I was looking for something cheap and flexible. I found a Craigslist ad for a month-to-month sublet in an older 2-bedroom apartment. The guy renting it was in his late 30s, said his last roommate had left suddenly for family reasons, and he needed someone to move in fast. It wasn't a great area, but it was cheap and close to work, so I figured I'd suck it up until I could find something better. When I came by to check out the place, it seemed lived in, but clean enough. Old building, kind of creaky floors, but it had working heat and hot water. The guy was polite but quiet. He didn't give off any obvious red flags right off the bat. Said the last roommate, a girl, had to leave quickly when her mom got sick or something. He didn't go into great detail and I didn't press. There were a few things that felt slightly strange though. The bathroom had a pink toothbrush in the holder next to his. When I asked if he had a girlfriend, he just told me no and that the last roommate had left in a rush. I moved in that weekend and the first week was fine. We kept to ourselves. He worked from home and was usually in his room with the door shut. I worked longer shifts, so I was mostly in and out. We had a basic arrangement: split the bills, keep shared spaces clean, no parties, easy. After about a week, I started noticing mail piling up by the door addressed to someone named Danielle. Most of it was junk, but some looked like bank statements or medical stuff. It didn't really bother me at first, but it kept coming day after day. One night, I asked him casually if he wanted me to write return to sender on the mail or anything. He just kind of shrugged it off and told me that she probably just forgot to change her address. Something about it didn't sit right with me. If she left in such a rush, why was all this stuff still tied to the apartment? And why hadn't she come back at all for it? I suspected maybe it was just a messy breakup that he wasn't being totally upfront about. Or maybe she stiffed him on the rent and he resented her and didn't want to talk about it. The weirdest part happened a couple of weeks later. I was cleaning out the utility closet in the hallway, one of those shallow ones with old paint cans and light bulbs, stuff nobody ever touches. Behind a stack of tarps and a broken fan, I found a duffel bag wedged way in the back, like someone had crammed it in there to hide it. Inside were a few pairs of women's shoes, some clothes, and a small zippered pouch with a non-expired credit card, a necklace, a gym membership card, also not expired, and some other odds and ends you'd find in a wallet or a purse, as well as a half-used bottle of perfume. The name on all the cards was the same as on the mail, someone named Danielle. I wasn't sure what to think. The stuff didn't look like trash. It looked like personal belongings, like someone had either stuffed them back there and long forgotten them, or wasn't able to come back for them. I put the bag back and went to my room. For hours, I just laid there, picturing my roommate on the other side of the wall in his room, and wondering if he had anything to do with the bag in the closet. The next day, I directly asked him about it. I didn't accuse him of anything, just said I had found a bag in the closet and asked if he wanted me to leave it out in case she ever came back for it, because some of the cards in there still looked active. He seemed confused for a second, like he genuinely didn't know what I was talking about. Then he kind of laughed it off and said, "Oh, yeah, I forgot that was in there. You can toss it out. She didn't want any of that crap." Something was wrong about the way he said it, like he was making it up on the spot, just bullshitting me. That night, he went out, and I called the non-emergency police line just to be safe and explain the situation in case they felt like it was worth looking into. I told them I didn't know if anything was actually wrong, but that the previous tenant was a girl who had supposedly left suddenly, and some of her stuff was still there, and that the whole apartment switch in retrospect was all kind of under the radar and something didn't feel right. They said they'd send someone by to take a statement. About a week later, a detective followed up on the phone. I offered for him to come by when my roommate wasn't there. They came by, took the duffel bag, and asked a lot of questions about when I moved in, how much I knew about my roommate, and what he said about the girl. Unfortunately, I didn't have a lot to tell them. That was the turning point for me. Now that the police were involved, I did not feel comfortable living there anymore. I was able to find a spare room to stay in for a few weeks through a family friend of my parents until I could relocate. A few weeks after that, the detective called me again. He said they found some forensic evidence in the apartment. Didn't say what, but that the case had been reclassified. My roommate, I guess, had moved out by then, packed up and left on a weekend, and just vanished. I never found out what really happened to Danielle. No articles ever ran that I saw or anything. That pink toothbrush stayed in the cup until the day I left. I never touched it, and I suspect that was all the forensic evidence that they needed. I used to browse Craigslist pretty regularly for old tools and hardware. Sometimes furniture, antique stuff mostly. Sometimes you'd find weird little gems that weren't picked over by the flippers yet. That's how I ended up at a supposed estate sale in this quiet little town about 45 minutes from where I live. The ad was weird, even by Craigslist standards. It just said, "Everything must go, sudden passing, no early birds, cash only." No pictures, just an address and a time window. But the location was right, and I had a free Saturday morning, so I figured, what the hell. When I got there, the place looked normal enough. A ranch-style house, kind of dated but not run down. The driveway didn't have any cars parked out front, and there were no signs, no folding tables on the lawn, nothing that screamed estate sale. I started to wonder if I had actually come on the wrong day. Then, this guy opens the door. He's probably early 40s, clean clothes, but no name tag or anything. Just jeans and a plain shirt. He looks around, up and down the street, and he ushered me inside. Right away, I was like, what the hell is up here? The place didn't look at all like it had been packed up after someone passed away. There were dishes in the sink, junk mail on the table, and a jacket slung over the back of a chair, like someone had just stepped out. Not cleaned or staged at all. But grief is a strange thing, and I didn't want to be a jerk who just expected things to be a certain way when I didn't know who this guy was or what he might be going through. In the living room, it was just electronics. It seemed like all of them throughout the house had been removed and put there in a pile on the floor. The guy brought me over to them and was kind of gesturing to me like, well, what do you think? But I really wasn't interested in that stuff at all. I also noticed he had started sweating, like pouring sweat, and it wasn't hot. I looked around and asked about a couple of bigger pieces, an antique desk and an old wall clock, things that would require me to get a larger vehicle to transport. The guy kind of froze up for a second before telling me that they weren't available, that those pieces were too big and it would make too much noise to move and he didn't want to disturb the neighbors. That was one of the weirdest explanations for not selling something at an estate sale that I have ever heard. I noticed a hallway off the main room with a door at the end. I saw that it was shut and asked if there was anything else for sale back there. The guy stiffened up a little and just said it was storage and not part of the sale. Then he immediately changed the subject back to the electronics and asked if I could just hurry up and decide about the equipment because he had other people coming soon. Right then, there was a knock at the front door. I turned and this older woman, maybe late 60s, was standing there with a look on her face like she'd just seen a ghost. She didn't say anything to me right away. She looked past me and at the man and asked him, "What are you doing in this house?" I stepped back in confusion and put my hands up. The guy didn't say anything. Then, at like the top of her voice, the woman shouted out, "This man doesn't own this house. He's not related to the homeowner. Now get out." She looked at me and told me that I needed to leave too, now. I looked over at the guy, who went from cold to tense to pissed in about 3 seconds flat. He said something to her like, "Be quiet or I will make you quiet." I stepped forward and put myself between him and the woman. He just stood there for a second, then turned around and went out through the back door like it was no big deal. I have no idea where he went. I walked outside and stayed with the woman while she was on the phone with the cops. When they got there, I gave them all the info I could before I went back home. Apparently, the person who actually owned the house had suffered a stroke and was in a long-term care facility. Still alive. No one was supposed to be in the house at all. The creepiest part was that while we were waiting for the cops, I asked her if she knew the man. She told me she had no idea who he was or how long he had had access to the home. For those lucky enough to have one, a normal life comes with so many things that can be taken for granted, like a sense of security. But after what happened to me, I know that in an instant, all of that can be completely annihilated. And once it's shattered, you may never get it back again. I've been a cleaner my whole life, so was my mother. I've always found it peaceful, even cathartic, especially when it's late and you're alone. I'm in my 50s now, and I've done every kind of cleanup gig there is. Fancy clients, poor, foreclosures, renovations, even a couple forensic crime scene cleanups. I don't scare easy, and I don't complain. You pay me, I'll get your place clean. This job came through my agency. One night deep clean at an old DMV building they were reopening, bathrooms only. The place had been closed for a few years and was going through some kind of phased remodel. No working staff yet. Evidently, the remaining construction or painting was so involved that they'd scheduled this as an overnight gig. The woman who called me said it was locked during off hours, so I'd have the place to myself. She left a key in a lockbox by the service entrance. That night, I came straight from a separate job and got there a little after 9 p.m. The building was exactly what you'd picture. Government concrete, just a stone box with dead landscaping. From the outside, it was almost completely dark, except for some work lights left hanging from extension cords. It was quiet. I let myself in, locked the door behind me, and turned on the hallway lights and followed the signs to the restrooms. I had gotten used to it at this point, but the feeling of being completely alone in a building like that can be unexpectedly unnerving. Knowing you're the only source of sound makes you extra sensitive to any kind of disturbance, and the otherwise silence can feel thick and overwhelming. The bathrooms were a mess. Rust stains, cracked mirrors, everything stinking like old pipes and mildew. I'd seen worse, but this wasn't pretty. Each bathroom had a few new windows above the toilets that looked freshly installed. If they were having me clean, that means they weren't going to totally overhaul the interior. but it looked like they were maybe starting with the windows and then moving on to a few other less crucial renovations, like the old cracked mirrors. I started with the men's room. I'd been in there for about an hour. Every now and then I'd hear a noise. It sounded like the door creaking open behind me, but no one was ever there. Like I said, when you work by yourself in these situations, you start getting hypersensitive to stuff, and you can trick yourself into thinking you're hearing things when you're not, or that a building's natural creaks and clunks are something more than they actually are. Out of caution, I kept checking, but there was never anything. It was more than likely just the building settling or the sound from me bouncing around in a weird way. I've worked nights in way worse places. I know not to let myself get too jumpy, so I let it go. But then, I was hunched over, scrubbing the basin of the middle sink, when out of the corner of my eye, without a doubt, I saw something move in the mirror. Someone had just walked into the bathroom behind me. I spun around. All the stall doors were closed. I had already cleaned the toilets and shut the stall doors one by one as I went, and distinctly remember leaving the last stall door open when I finished. I called out hello. Nothing. Dead quiet. Just the drops of water in my mop bucket echoing through the room. Very slowly, I cautiously walked down the row of stalls, one by one gently pushing them open. Nothing. But when I got to the last one, the one closest to the door, I stopped. There was a shadow on the floor inside the stall. Not moving, just floating there. Whoever it was standing on the toilet. I didn't even breathe. I just turned and walked calmly back to my bucket, grabbing my phone and car keys. I looked back. The shadow hadn't moved. I started to step as quietly as I could toward the exit, but the layout was such that in order to get to the door, I literally had to pass directly in front of the stall and around a tile wall that protruded in to give the urinals privacy. I was spiraling. I didn't know what options I even had. I was not going to walk directly past this person. That's when I heard two soft footsteps stepping down from off the toilet onto the tile. I looked down, and I did not move. I could see two boots now standing on the floor inside the stall. I didn't wait. My instincts took over. I ran back to the middle stall, slammed it shut and locked it behind me, climbed onto the toilet, and shoved my arms up to open one of the new windows that I had seen when I first came in. What I didn't know was whether or not it would open, or if I could even fit through it. But it did open. It all happened in an instant. I jumped and heaved my body up through it. It was just wide enough for me. I could hear whoever else was in the bathroom open the stall door and was now moving around in the bathroom behind me. My ribs were grinding against the sill as I pushed myself through the window. As I was halfway out, the bathroom door slammed behind me, hard. I fell into the dirt outside, tore my pants and cut my palm, but I didn't stop. I ran around the side of the building, staying in the shadows, got in my car, and drove. Didn't even think about the cleaning bucket until I was halfway home. I called the agency the next morning and told them what had happened, and that I was done with solo night jobs unless it was for a private or higher-end client. I went back to the site the next day during the daylight when the contractors were there and retrieved my cleaning bucket, but the building key was missing. Whoever took it had been watching me, waiting. Probably saw me arrive and knew I was alone. But how they got in there, I have no idea, or what they intended to do to me in that bathroom. But I can tell you this, I'll never take another solo job that doesn't have at least one window. This was when I lived alone in a small one-bedroom apartment on the second floor of a pretty run-down building. It was a dump. The hallway carpets always smelled faintly like smoke, and the walls had those yellowed light switches from like the 90s. I was glad to have a roof over my head, but it definitely was not great. Rent was cheap though, and it was close to where I was working at the time. I was in my late 20s. I worked long hours, left early, and came home late. I didn't have much of a social life, which was fine. I mostly kept to myself. It's not much different now. My routine has always been pretty locked in. Wake up, shower, work, dinner, maybe a few YouTube videos, sleep. Same thing every day. So anyway, after a few months of living in this place, I started noticing something weird. My shower curtain. I've always had the habit of pulling it shut after I use it. Not halfway or bunched up, completely shut. I don't know why. I guess I'm just kind of OCD. I like how it looks. Makes the bathroom feel tidier. Anyway, one day I got home from work, went to brush my teeth, and the curtain was slightly open. Not all the way, just a few inches, but enough to catch my attention. The only conclusion that I could come to was that I must have left it like that without realizing, so I forgot about it. But then it happened again a few days later, and then again the next week. By the fourth or fifth time, I knew I wasn't forgetting. I'm not the type to leave stuff out of place, quite the opposite actually. I started thinking maybe my landlord had been sending in maintenance or a plumber or something without telling me. For what, I have no idea, but I had no other conclusion to draw, so I asked. He said no, there hadn't been any work orders. I even checked my lease and saw that they were supposed to give me notice. The door was always locked when I got home. No signs of forced entry or anything like that. No other stuff moved around, just the curtain. It became this stupid little thing I fixated on. I'd pull it shut in the morning and take a mental picture of it in my head. Then I'd come home and go straight to the bathroom. Half the time it was still shut. The other half, it wasn't. I started leaving the bathroom light on when I left for work. I figured maybe in the off chance someone was messing around, the light would make them think I was still home. I also started checking the closet, under the bed, stuff like that. I know it sounds paranoid, but once you get the idea in your head that someone might be entering your place, it sticks. Then one night, it happened. In a rare change of pace, I'd gone out for a few drinks with someone from work, got home around 11. I was buzzed but not drunk. As soon as I stepped inside, I felt it. This weird tension, like the air was heavier. I locked the door behind me, tossed my keys in the bowl, and went straight to the bathroom. The light was off. I had left it on. I stood in the doorway, flicked the light switch on, and listened. There was a dripping sound coming from the tub faucet like it had just been used, and the curtain was slightly open again. Through the translucent material, I could see some sort of blurry mass looming on the other side. I didn't even think. I just walked straight to the tub and yanked the curtain open. There was a fucking naked man crouched in the tub, drying up water droplets with a dirty old towel. He had just been squatting there in the dark. He was maybe in his 30s and clearly homeless. Next to the tub, I hadn't even noticed his dirty clothes in a pile behind the toilet. He didn't move. Just stared up at me, hunched over with these wide, bloodshot eyes like I'd caught him mid-breath. I got out of there so goddamn fast I almost don't even remember any of it. The only detail I do remember is getting this horrible sensation on my skin as I ran out. That like at any moment I would feel his wet, clammy hands grabbing at me. I slammed the door shut behind me and ran down the hallway, yelling for someone to call the cops. The guy didn't run. He was still there when the police showed up. It turns out there's this hatch in the maintenance closet in the hallway. Leads up into a crawl space above the ceiling. One of the panels in my bathroom ceiling was loose, and that's how he was getting in. He'd apparently been living in that space for at least a few days, maybe longer, but they suspected that he'd been coming and going for quite a while. Only came down when he knew I wasn't home. He had been using the towel to dry up after himself, so literally the only reason I knew something was off was because of the shower curtain. Behind my sink was an empty water bottle and a phone charger plugged into an outlet. He'd set up this whole little hidden area for his own personal use. The cops arrested him. I never got any information on him, just that he had priors. Breaking and entering, trespassing, stuff like that. That was the last straw living in that building. I moved out as soon as I could, but it still took a couple months. I don't care how crazy it sounds. Every time I step into a bathroom now, the first thing I do is check behind the shower curtain. every single time, just to feel safe. This is my real-life nightmare from about 2 years ago when I was driving from upstate New York to visit a friend in Pennsylvania. It wasn't a horribly long trip, just a few hours, but like an idiot, I took a wrong turn somewhere and ended up on some back roads I wasn't familiar with. I eventually figured it out, turned myself around, was able to get a signal again, and my phone GPS and I got back on track. But by the time I hit this tiny stretch of state highway, I really had to pee. Like bad. There weren't many options out here, mostly trees and the occasional farm field, which for me as a lady was a hard pass. Eventually, I spotted a gas station just off the road. It looked like something out of a retro horror movie. Faded signs and one lonely pickup truck parked out front, but it was open, so I pulled in. Inside, it was quiet. A guy was behind the counter, watching something on his phone and barely looked up when I walked in. I asked if there was a bathroom, and he pointed to a door around the side. Didn't say anything, just pointed. The bathroom was one of those single-person, unisex stalls with a door that opened directly to the outside. The kind where you have to go back outside and around the side of the building to get to it, which already felt kind of sketchy. I walked over and noticed the door was a little off its hinges. It closed, but not tightly, and the lock was one of those sliding bolts that didn't quite line up. Outside, above the door, was a white light that was buzzing and completely covered with bugs. My gut wanted me to hold off and wait for something better, but my bladder refused. I went in, slid the bolt shut as best I could, and sat down. It was gross. I tried to make physical contact with as little as humanly possible. I kept my foot near the door just in case and pulled out my phone to scroll and distract myself. Not even a minute later, I heard heavy footsteps approach the outside of the door, and a moment later, the handle jiggled. Just a light, slow turn like someone was checking to see if it was locked. I called out to them that I would be just a second, definitely loud enough to be heard, but there was no response. The handle stopped moving. I sat there, just kind of frozen, and was having trouble finishing because I was so suddenly tense. I felt completely vulnerable. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I waited, listening. No footsteps, no apology, just silence. Whoever it was hadn't walked away. They were just standing on the outside of the door. Then, without warning, the door suddenly pushed forward a few inches, just enough that I could see a slice of outside light and movement. The bolt slipped out of the socket. I jumped up and slammed my hand against it, yelling that someone was in here. I swear to God, there was a face looking in. I couldn't tell how old they were, or even what they really looked like. It was just like an eye looking at me. There was a pause. Then they started trying to force the door open. Immediately, I threw all of my weight against it, pressing my leg against the back wall and forcing my shoulder into it as hard as I could. They were throwing their own weight against it at the same time, over and over. I was pressing my body so hard against it, and the whole door was vibrating against me with every impact, so hard that I could feel it grinding against the top knobby part of my shoulder bone. I started screaming as loud as I could. Then, it just stopped. Then footsteps, slow, deliberate steps, walking away on the gravel. I stood there, in shock, trying to breathe quietly and not move. I relocked the door, kept pressing myself against the door, and stayed in that bathroom for another 5 minutes or so before deciding to leave. I threw the door open and ran out. Nobody, just the wind and the sound of a flag flapping somewhere. I walked around the side of the building back to the front. The pickup truck that had been there when I arrived was gone. Inside, the attendant hadn't moved, still staring at his phone. He didn't even glance at me. I didn't say anything. I just walked straight to my car. As I pulled out of the lot, I checked the rearview mirror, just reflex, and I thought I saw something. Not a person exactly, just a dark shape, maybe 20 or 30 feet into the tree line behind the station. Could have been a trick of the light or pure paranoia. Could have been a stump or a shadow. I didn't stop to check. I drove until I hit the next major road and didn't pull over again until I reached my friend's place. I honestly don't know where it would have gone if I hadn't been able to press my legs against the back wall like I did. But every time I think about that face just standing there, not surprised, not even trying to cover it up, I get this knot in my stomach. I have not since, and I never will again, stop at a bathroom like that again. If you ever rent a cabin off-grid, even 1 mile from the nearest neighbor, take this from me. Always, always make sure you lock the door behind you. I was doing a solo road trip through Alaska. Without trying to be dramatic, I was going through a thing at the time. It was just one of those moments in life where you wake up one day and realize everything familiar is kind of suffocating. I needed space, and Alaska had always felt like the end of the world in a good way. I didn't have a lot of money to throw around, so I kept things cheap. Slept in the back of my SUV for a few nights, booked some budget motels, and then found this dry cabin listed on a weird little forum for outdoorsy types. It was cheap, off-grid, and looked peaceful. The description said it had no plumbing, no running water, but it had a wood stove, solar lights, and a compost outhouse about 50 yards out back. It's not something I would have the grit to do for an extended period of time, but it seemed like a decent place to disappear for a couple nights. When I got there was no host, just a note inside a hard plastic case fixed on the wall next to the door, like a permanent set of instructions for whoever happened to be staying there at any given time. There was also a couple bundles of firewood stacked on the little front porch and a 5-gallon jug of water inside on the counter. The tree line was close, like really close, not dense but tall and tight, like a wall around the clearing. There was no signal, no Wi-Fi, nothing, and I liked that part, at first. The first night went fine. It creaked a lot, but I figured that was normal for a place like this. I had an axe and a good flashlight, and the stove worked great. Only thing that annoyed me, though, was the outhouse. It was way too far for convenience, especially in the middle of the night. I get why it was like that. It's better than it being right outside the window. But at the same time, walking across a property in remote Alaskan wilderness in the dead of night is not ideal. It was quite the shock to my modern standard of comfort. Second night, I made a fire, read a little, cooked a meal from my cooler, and drank a couple beers. Around 11, I grabbed my jacket and boots, strapped on my headlamp, and headed to the outhouse. It was cold. Those Alaskan nights don't mess around. I left the cabin light on behind me. It was solar-powered and faint, but enough to cast a soft glow through the windows. The trail to the outhouse was narrow and a little overgrown, but not unmanageable. The worst part was just the distance. I got there, went inside, did what I had to do, and was just about to zip up when I heard something in the woods. Not a branch falling, not an animal scurrying. It sounded like a single step crunching on the forest floor, maybe 20 feet off in the woods, then silence. I kept still and listened. I was not necessarily overly concerned about the possibility of bears out here, but it's something anybody traveling through Alaska will keep in mind. I've also heard nightmares about encountering wolves in vulnerable situations exactly like this one. There wasn't another sound. No more crunching, no movement, just wind. I slowly cracked the wooden door open and stepped outside, scanning behind the outhouse with my headlamp. I couldn't see anything out of the ordinary. I was on edge, but I told myself it was either just the forest shifting around or maybe a smaller animal moving through the night. But when I turned toward the cabin, I realized the light was off. It wasn't motion activated. It stayed on unless you flipped the switch inside. Through the beam of the headlamp, I could see the front door hanging wide open. I stood there for a second, just staring at the open door. I knew I'd latched it. I went through it again and again in my mind, and while I had had a couple beers, to this day I'm 100% certain that I latched it on my way out. My heart started knocking in my chest. It was primal fear. The best description I can give is that it felt like walking into a dark room you believed was empty and suddenly seeing someone's shadow standing in the corner. I immediately turned off my headlamp to remain unseen and crept up the path toward the cabin. When I reached the porch, I stopped. I heard nothing. There was a smell hanging in the air though, like cold sweat and old fabric or bad BO or something. It hadn't been there before, and it wasn't me. I didn't go inside, I couldn't, even knowing how much stuff I had in there. I just backed away, snuck off slowly, and kept walking past the cabin toward the trailhead. My car was parked maybe not even a quarter mile down the road. No tires were slashed or anything like that. I got in, locked the doors, and stayed there the rest of the night. I also finally had access to the firearm that I kept in there. In the morning, after the sun was up, I went back. Normally I wouldn't do this, but I had enough stuff in there that I needed to see for myself what was going on and try to get it. I told myself that if it felt sketchy, I would bail. Looking in from the tree line, the door was still hanging open. I waited for probably around 15 minutes and saw no movement, so I decided to make my move. I walked up and went inside. No one was there. My bags had been moved and the zippers were open, like someone had looked through them. Nothing crucial was missing though, at least not that I could tell. There was food missing though. My cooler had been basically drained. I packed up fast and left. I tried to contact the owner repeatedly, but they never answered my calls or returned my messages. Since that trip, I haven't stayed off-grid since, and I have my doubts that I'll ever feel the desire to again. Years ago, I was picking up work for a short-term rental company. I'm in my 40s, live in a pretty rural area, and did this kind of stuff between other gigs. Cleaning, light repairs, inventory. It was sort of like if you imagine being a freelance superintendent. One of the properties I was assigned to was a large rental on a wooded lot about 30 minutes outside of town. Pretty nice place. It had a big A-frame house that got rented out on the weekends and a smaller back cabin that wasn't part of the listing. The back cabin was always locked. Guests were told it was off limits. I assumed the owner used it for storage or something. I never really asked. I was just told I didn't need to look after it. Anyway, early one Monday morning, like we're talking pre-dawn, after a weekend booking, I drove out to clean the main house. I like getting these gigs out of the way early in the day so they didn't eat up all my daylight. As expected, the place was deserted. No other cars in the driveway, and the house looked undisturbed. I went in, opened some windows, stripped the beds, and took the linens out to the laundry shed. That's when I noticed something off. The back cabin, the little one tucked behind the trees, had its porch light on. That might not sound like much, but I was out there the Friday before doing a quick check-in before the guests arrived, and the light was definitely off. In fact, I'd never even seen it on to begin with. No one had any business being in there, let alone messing around with any of the lights. The keys for that cabin were kept by the owner, and only the owner, and again, it wasn't listed for guests. I put down the laundry bin and cautiously walked toward it. The blinds were drawn as usual, but I could hear something. Faint voices and thumping around, like people moving around inside. Not loud or panicked, just people having a quiet conversation and moving around. Then I heard a dull thunk, like something heavy being dropped, broken, or dragged across the floor. I stopped where I was and stepped behind a tree to remain unseen. Then I called the owner. No answer. It was early and cell signal was spotty out there, but even so, I was getting a bad feeling. I thought it was maybe possible someone was squatting or a former guest had found a spare key hidden somewhere and was messing around. I stepped back out from behind the tree and crossed the yard, quietly coming around to a side window. One of the blinds was bent just enough for me to peek through. There were people inside. 2 guys, maybe 3. One of them was going through boxes, pulling things out and setting them aside. It looked more like personal stuff, documents, finances, paper files, and small containers. With that realization, I knew this was above my pay grade. Whatever was going on in there in the pre-dawn hours of morning was not anything good. I didn't understand what I was really looking at, but I just knew it felt wrong. I turned to head back to the main house and my vehicle and was about halfway there when I heard the screen door creak behind me. I turned around. One of the guys was standing on the porch of the back cabin, watching me. He was just a silhouette against the porch light. Another guy stepped out behind him, looking around the corner and over the first guy's shoulder. He was holding something in his hand. It looked like maybe a tire iron or a crowbar or something, but I couldn't see well enough to know. My knee-jerk reaction was to put my hands up and explain that I was just there to clean the house. Tried to act like I didn't want trouble, told them I'd get out of their way. The first guy said something I couldn't hear to the other one, who stepped down off the porch and started walking toward me. I don't think they realized they had turned the porch light on, and they must have done it by accident when they were finding their way inside. Because as this guy was approaching me, he turned and looked at it and suddenly stopped. Then he called something back to his friend, and then the light immediately went out. There was some light in the sky at that point, but the change was so sudden I couldn't see anything at first. I just heard this guy start running toward me. So I did the same, straight around the side of the house to my truck. Didn't look back. I peeled out and got back to the main road. Once I got back toward town a bit, I had a clean signal again. I called the police and then the rental company. Told them there were people on site and to confirm with the owner, but that I was certain they weren't supposed to be there. The owner never followed up with me directly. I was pulled off that property for future bookings. No one told me why. I assumed maybe they felt like I was somehow responsible for the incident or something. But I don't know, and I don't really care. I asked around, but the most information I could get was that the back cabin wasn't on any public records or listings. It didn't even show up on the property map they gave guests. I still don't know what was in that cabin or what they were doing. But I do know, whoever those guys were, they never intended to be seen. My girlfriend and I had planned this quiet long weekend. She's really good about looking forward and making sure we set aside time to unplug and enjoy life. I'm usually the opposite, running around distracted, caught up in the little picture stuff. Anyway, we were looking forward to getting out of the city for a couple days. We booked this cabin off Airbnb somewhere up in northern New Hampshire. The listing made it sound ideal and romantic. Off-grid, no cell service, wood stove, no nearby neighbors. It honestly sounded like the perfect place to disconnect after months of grinding at work. We got there late on Friday. The road was more like a long dirt trail, and by the time we pulled up to the cabin, it was almost dark. No lights outside, obviously, just the soft crunch of tires on gravel and the surrounding woods pressing in. The cabin itself was small but nice, basic as promised. One room with a kitchenette, a table, a small couch, and a bed tucked off to the side. Big windows facing the woods, wood stove in the corner. Maybe it was just because we weren't used to living so rustically, but our first impression was that it felt like a place that looked cozy in the daytime photos, but was actually kind of creepy at night. We got a fire going, opened a bottle of wine, and made pasta on the propane stove. It was quiet and peaceful, and honestly, we started kind of enjoying it. Not a single sound except like crickets. No far off traffic, no hum of electricity, just nothing. Having always lived in the city, I've never experienced that in my life before. It was both awe-inspiring and kind of ominous. That first night was fine, cold but fine. The next day, we hiked a little trail behind the cabin. It was overgrown and barely marked. We didn't see anyone out there, not even footprints. I remember my girlfriend joked that it felt like we were in the setup of a horror movie, to which I laughed and told her not to jinx it. That night, after dinner, we settled into bed early. No Wi-Fi, no service, and we'd burned through our downloaded movies. Basically, once the sun goes down out there in the sticks, without TV and phones, you run out of things to do pretty quick. Around midnight, we were both just lying there, half awake, when we heard it. A scream. It came from right outside the window. A full, sharp, human scream. No lead up, just one clean blast of sound that stopped mid-cry. We both sat straight up. After a moment had passed, we both looked at each other, waiting for the other to say something. Neither of us knew what to do. I got out of bed and grabbed the flashlight we'd left by the wood stove. I eased up to the front window, clicked it on, and angled the beam outside. Trees, gravel, empty porch. No movement. And then it came again. Slightly different, like someone else, or maybe the same voice trying to sound like a different person. I whipped the flashlight around but saw nothing, just the woods. We double-checked that all the doors and windows were shut and locked, then pulled the curtains shut. There was this weight in the air, like the cabin itself had suddenly gotten smaller. There was definitely a person out there, or more than one. And obviously, I knew there was a chance somebody was just messing with us, but what do you do with that information? It's a big gamble to risk assuming it's just a silly prank, because all it takes is being wrong once, and that there was a very real possibility that somebody very unwell was right on the other side of the wall, and who knows what they wanted. I asked if we should leave, but she reminded me that we had no signal, and the next town was like a good 20 minutes back down the dirt road. Driving in the pitch dark with no GPS didn't necessarily feel any safer, let alone having to leave the cabin and get to the car with no idea where this person was. Then came the tapping on the window. Someone wanted us to know they were still out there and that they knew they had trapped us, like fish in a tank. Neither of us got up to look. We just waited. Nothing followed. We stayed up till sunrise, literally didn't sleep at all. When light finally started to creep through the edges of the curtains, we gathered our stuff in silence and we sprinted to the car. Once we got in and the doors were locked, we didn't speak until we hit the main road. It was a total bust. We just drove the long trip home completely exhausted, nerves wrecked. A few weeks later, I checked the Airbnb listing again and found a negative review down near the bottom that we hadn't seen when we had made the booking. All it said was, "Do not stay here." I wish we had seen it sooner. I thought I'd outrun my past, buried who I was. Then one night, I found it looking back at me through the glass. During a not so long ago summer where I was basically homeless, I fell into this carnival job. I met a guy at a gas station who was working with one that was on tour, and he offered to help me out. It was the only thing I could find that would pay cash and ask zero questions. It felt like everyone else there had a history too, and I could kind of disappear. I was 26, 6 months clean, and still hearing from people who wanted their money back. A traveling midway felt like a moving hiding place where I could be nobody for a while. You set up fencing, dissolve into a crowd, sleep in a bunk behind the prize trailer, and by the time anyone figures out who you are, the trucks are already rolling to the next county. And it worked, until the route sheet said we were heading to a town I used to live in. The last time I'd seen the place, I was sneaking out of a basement window while two guys pounded on the front door looking for their money. I hoped that 3 years, a beard, and the cover of night was enough camouflage, so I kept my mouth shut and laid low. A week before we rolled in, I started getting these cryptic texts. Initially, I thought they were spam. I didn't know how anyone would even have my number. I had changed it so many times. Each one was like a single line of text. Shit like, "Can't hide, bro," or "See you soon." I never responded to any of them, but I'm not gonna lie, I started to sweat it. I'd dodge the day work, stare at the bunk ceiling until it got dark, and wait for the next tire hiss to mean we'd stopped, not knowing what or who I'd be walking into in the next town. The first night in town was nothing. Families swarmed the rides, kids screamed, lights flashed, smelled like diesel and funnel cake. All the usual stuff. I sold wristbands and kept my eyes on the crowd. No old faces, no one staring. Second night, the same. I started to think maybe the messages were a random troll, or that in the end I'd gotten lucky. Third night, though, I felt it. Every time I glanced up, this guy was across the midway watching, turning away when I looked at him, or on his phone talking while he watched me from behind some ride or game, pretending like he wasn't. Always just far enough that he was too in shadow to identify. I had some hunches on who it might be, but when you screw things up as badly as I did, there's no telling who or how many might come back to square things up. I'd look away to make change, look back, and he'd be gone. Half an hour later, I'd catch him again, somewhere else, keeping tabs on me. Around 11, I was told to drag a crate of tools to the storage tent behind the funhouse. The carnival was shutting down. At some point, I'd lost track of the guy and convinced myself I was being paranoid and it was over. To be safe, I ducked out and cut through the back lot. It was nearly deserted at that point. I was 3/4 of the way there when I heard footsteps somewhere else in the lot. I stopped. I turned around. There was nothing but the shadows of trailers and storage containers. I focused and tried to listen, but the only sound I could hear was the distant carnival music and the fading screams of people taking their last rides. There were no other lights besides the flashing ones from the nearest ride, and they only barely illuminated the lot. Their constantly changing pattern kept your eyes from being fully able to focus and adjust. That's when it kicked off. I turned back around and a figure stepped out from behind an out-of-service food truck about 10 feet in front of me. It was quick and quiet, and I don't think he expected me to turn around when I did. He reflexively started to step back behind the truck, but once he realized I had seen him, just stood there half behind it. It happened fast. There was a second where neither of us moved or said anything, like we were both waiting for the other person to do something first. Then, before he got enough time to decide, I just dropped the crate and started sprinting. Instead of running further out into the nothing surrounding the lot, my instinct in that moment was to try to bury myself among as many people as possible. I beelined it directly across the lot and over a short fence that funneled people into line. This guy was chasing me. I could hear him. Almost immediately, I completely wiped out on the metal fencing and thought I broke my ankle. I got back up, plowed through a trash can, and got around behind the funhouse, which we used as overflow storage in the off hours. I opened the back flap and snuck in. The area I was in was one of those mirror maze things. We called it the Hall of Mirrors. Inside, everything was way quieter, but I did not feel safe at all. I was breathing loud, my heart was pounding, and I didn't know if this dude was still chasing me, or if he was carrying a knife or gun or club or what. There were crates of electrical all over the floor, which meant other people had started bringing stuff in to store for the night. I stepped over them and deeper in, but there was literally nowhere to hide. Everywhere I looked, I saw my reflection, and there was no place I could get away from it. At that point, I was stuck. Even though I hadn't been in there long, it was more than enough time for this dude to catch up to me if I tried to step back out and find another place to hide. It was painfully silent in there. I didn't move. I couldn't do anything except wait. I stayed in there for probably 30 long minutes, the entire time expecting him to burst through the back. Eventually, I heard the carnival finally power down and things go quiet. I didn't go back for the crate. I waited until all the lights were out, snuck straight back to the bunk, grabbed my duffel, and waited by the highway until a midnight bus took me 2 towns east. Never picked up my pay, just left. I hoped that carnival would be a place to disappear. Turns out it was just a moving target. The past doesn't need a map to find you. Wherever you go, it goes. It only needs time, and sooner or later you may find that you have no choice but to face it. I was 28 that summer, working as a night supervisor at a fast food place between 2 working-class towns in a rural state. It wasn't what I wanted to be doing, but I was saving for a move, and those were the kind of jobs available where I'm from. I don't like conflict or dealing with jerks, but I was good at the bustle and organization, kept the place running smooth, and kept the teens from walking all over me. It was greasy, loud, and always a little chaotic, but that's work, and that's life. In June, this new kid got hired. 19, maybe 20, really quiet. Wouldn't say anything unless you spoke to him directly, and even then, his replies were barely above a mumble. He hardly made eye contact. He wasn't bad necessarily, did what was asked of him, but something was always a little off from the beginning. Not in like a cartoonish way, just a weird energy, like he was always somewhere else. 2 weeks in with this kid, and the regional manager calls me. Said the registers had been short a few nights in a row, not by much, but enough to check footage. Sure enough, the kid had been skimming. Not massively, but consistently. They told me to let him go before the end of his shift. I always hated this part. Most people react without causing problems, but some people are just unpredictable and you don't really know how they're going to respond to that kind of news. I waited until close. Then I asked him into the back office, told him it wasn't working out, and explained the reason. He didn't argue, just stared at me, not a single word. Just shrugged, turned, grabbed his hoodie, and walked out the back without punching out. I watched him go through the camera feed. He didn't slam the door, didn't look back. The total silence of it all was weird, but not necessarily off-brand, I guess. The next night, I noticed the back gate wasn't secure, even after I was sure I'd personally shut it. Maybe I was tired and forgot, or one of the dishwashers had gone back out for something. Then, I found a still warm cigarette on the stoop out back by the dumpster. I don't smoke. No one on shift that night did either. And there was a designated smoking spot around the other side of the building. It's not that the idea of someone smoking back there was such a shock. It's that where I live, the only way you could get there was to drive. People weren't walking around near us or like wandering over from another store or apartment building or something. It was just us and then the woods behind us. We were just a stop on the road, and this was after close. So I clocked it and tried to be a little more mindful when I would take the trash out at night. Keys between my fingers when I walked to my car. Then, Friday came. It was a late one. I was alone after the line cook left at 11. I stayed back doing the deep clean, making sure everything looked right for the weekend. At around 12:30, I grabbed the last trash bag and went out back to the dumpster. The routine was to bring out the last bag and then padlock the chain on the dumpster shut so that it was secure overnight. The light above the door buzzed. The gravel was damp from a storm earlier in the day, and the woods behind the lot were black. I walked over and threw the lid of the dumpster open, then bent down to get a better grip on the trash bag. I heaved it in and suddenly felt something shove me deeper into the dumpster, hard, from behind. My foot slipped on the wet edge of the concrete platform and nearly toppled in, which then prompted whoever was behind me to grab at my legs and try to lift me over and into the dumpster. At the same time, this heat hit my face. Inside the dumpster, there was a small fire burning. I started flailing around in total primitive desperation. Whoever was behind me had pinned me against the dumpster and was trying to lift me over the edge and dump me in while there was a fire inside. I thrashed around as hard as I could, started screaming and kicked backwards against them with everything I had. I yanked myself away from him and fell to the ground hard. He tried to grab me again, but I rolled and kicked. He wasn't saying anything, was just after me like an animal. Then, as I scrambled to my feet and got a little distance, he ran. Took off into the woods behind the lot like he'd rehearsed it. The fire wasn't growing much, just licked at the inside of the dumpster. It was smoking more than anything else. I got back inside and locked the door, called the fire department. They showed up maybe 15 minutes later. They called in an ambulance with an EMT just to give me a look over, but I was fine. I worked my shifts like normal going forward, but started bringing pepper spray in my bag. That night sticks with me, because it wasn't just a scare. It wasn't just weird, it was a plan. Someone waited, knew my routine, and tried to end it right then and there. Why me? The only thing I can come up with is that I'm the one who fired that kid, and I'm sure that's who it had to be. The dumpster didn't burn much, it didn't even set off the alarm. But there's no way of knowing what would have happened if he had been able to get me over the side. Especially if that person held the lid shut, or worse, padlocked it shut. It was 2016, I believe, and I got a job for the summer working as a lifeguard at the community pool in my hometown. It was your typical seasonal job, 10-hour shifts, minimum wage, and long stretches of sitting under an umbrella trying not to fall asleep. Not that I didn't take it seriously, but nothing ever happened. It was chill, just boring. That year, the heat in July was so bad and the pool was packed every day. We rotated shifts pretty regularly, but I usually ended up on midday and closing duty. That meant I was often one of the last ones there, rinsing off chlorine in the staff locker room alone. The locker room was small, just a few stalls and a set of lockers in the back hall of the building. Private enough, but old and kind of falling apart. Midway through the summer, I guess maybe almost August, I started noticing weird little things with my clothes. I always brought a clean change and kept it in a tote bag inside my locker. But a few times when I went to change, the shirt smelled faintly like cleaning supplies or something. I couldn't really identify it, but these were clean clothes directly from home and suddenly taking on a different smell. I thought maybe something was going on with our washing machine or dryer at home, or possibly it was just from sitting in the locker room for too long, or even that being exposed to chlorine every day that summer was making me smell things differently. But that wasn't the only thing that was weird. Sometimes my socks felt slightly damp or clammy or something, like someone had worn them and then folded them back up. At first, I couldn't tell if it was the humidity of the showers or maybe that I'd grabbed the wrong shirt out of the laundry, but it stuck out enough to make me question it. I started tying the bag shut tighter and double-checked the lock. The lockers were these old-school style ones where you'd get a little key at the beginning of your shift and use it to lock it up. I started double-checking to make sure it was locked every time I put my bag in there, but it kept happening. One time, my sports bra was inside out. Another time, I noticed a hair tie I didn't remember using was stretched out and wet. Nothing was stolen, just strange. I mentioned it once to another guard in passing, kind of as a joke, and she laughed and told me that I was being haunted by a pool ghost. The janitor was this older guy. He seemed totally normal, and honestly, and this is no disrespect, but just completely average. Wasn't creepy like you might think, but kind of bland and just always around, always there. He cleaned the bathrooms, hosed down the pool deck, restocked supplies. We didn't speak really, but he always nodded at me when I walked by. He seemed nice enough. He had a huge key ring clipped to his belt and shuffled around like he'd been working there forever. The night it happened, I had the last shift. We closed around 8:30, and I was the only one left inside after the others had clocked out. I did a quick rinse-off in the shower. The showers were the kind that run on a timer, so sometimes, even after you got out, they would keep going and it would sound like you were still in there. This led to a lot of jump scares between the other guards and I. Anyway, all of that is to say, the shower kept going, but I got out. I wrapped myself in a towel and went to the locker room to change. Just as I turned the corner, I stopped myself and immediately backed up, leaving only my eye peeking around the corner. The janitor was standing with his back to me and my tote bag was open on the bench next to him. He was half dressed in my clothes. My lifeguard shirt was halfway down his arms. My shorts were bunched up around his bare legs. He was staring down at them, breathing kind of heavy. He wasn't aware that I had seen him, but right then, I heard the shower turn off behind me. The timer had run out. I saw him hear it too, and he immediately started taking my clothes off, smelling them as he put them back into the bag. I backed up, quietly shut the bathroom door, and locked it. I was terrified and felt sick. I texted my coworker who had just left and told her what was happening, but she didn't get back to me. I stayed in there for what felt like forever. I could hear him moving around, zipping something, then the door opening and closing. After a few minutes, I came out and he was gone. My bag was shut like nothing had happened. I reported it the next day. Management took it seriously, called the police, and found some of my clothes in a locked storage closet near the pump room. I hadn't even noticed they'd gone missing. There were other things in there too. A pair of goggles that didn't belong to any of us, and even a woman's swimsuit. He was fired immediately. But because there wasn't any security camera footage and he claimed he was just cleaning up discarded items, nothing stuck. No charges. I finished the job that summer, but I haven't worked at a pool since. And to this day, I always make sure I'm completely alone and the door is locked before I change, no matter where I am. My car broke down on a 2-lane highway somewhere outside of Syracuse, and I didn't have AAA or anything like that back then. This was way before Uber. I was heading to a weekend thing with some friends who I get together with once or twice a year. I tried everything I could, but I don't know crap about cars, so pretty quickly I just gave up and accepted that I wasn't going to get anywhere without help. I sat there for almost an hour waiting for someone who might stop by to help. Cars passed, but nobody stopped. Eventually, someone in an old pickup pulled over. It was a guy, maybe in his 30s or 40s. He rolled down his window, asked what the problem was, and I explained the situation to him. He seemed a little tentative at first, which I can't blame him for. He got out and took a look at the vehicle. He couldn't figure out what the problem was either, but he said he could give me a ride to the next town and hopefully drop me off at either a tow company or a mechanic. As far as I was concerned, it was way better than sitting out here for the rest of the day and night. The guy seemed normal too, which was not necessarily what I expected from someone willing to just pull over on the highway and offer a random stranger help. He told me his name was Mike, and we got in his truck. We made small talk for a little while and eventually relaxed around each other. He came across as someone that I could see myself actually being friends with, which was a relief. Anyway, we weren't even like 15 minutes down the road when we got stuck behind this sedan that was all over the place. I don't really remember how it got in front of us because I only started paying attention once it started behaving erratically, swerving, speeding up, and slowing down, crossing the center line like the driver was falling asleep or messed up on something. Mike made a couple jokes about them being wasted, but we kept our distance. It was kinda sketch though. The way this person was driving was simultaneously aggressive and reckless. We weren't the only ones who noticed it either, but I don't think anyone on the road really knew how to respond to it. The driver even almost hit a couple different vehicles while he was trying to change lanes. He'd start cutting across, almost hit someone like he didn't see them, they'd honk, and he'd jerk the wheel back and even it out like nothing had happened. This repeated multiple times. Our off-ramp came up and the car took it as well. We followed them off the ramp and onto a road with far sparser traffic. We kept tailing them for a few minutes until we pulled up to a red light just outside this little town. One of those four-way stops that isn't quite highway but also not quite back road, if that makes sense. No other cars were around, just us and the sedan in front of us. Then, out of nowhere, the back passenger side door of the sedan popped open. Not like it bounced open by accident, it fully popped open. And then this girl, barefoot, maybe 16 or 17, fell out. I'm not even kidding. She launched herself out of the back seat, hit the pavement hard, scrambled to her feet and sprinted straight back toward us, flailing her arms around, which were tied together. Mike and I were both in shock, just staring straight ahead at the scene unfolding in front of us. Then, he threw the truck in park and we both got out. She was sobbing, screaming that she needed help. Her clothes were dirty and her hair was tangled. She ran behind Mike's truck and crouched down like she was trying to keep it between her and the other vehicle. Then, the guy from the sedan got out. He looked pissed and started walking directly toward us like he was gonna grab her. Didn't say a word. Mike started yelling things. "Don't come over here, we're calling the cops, we got your plate." Unexpectedly, this stopped the guy in his tracks. He looked at both of us, then glanced back toward his car. The light, which at this point had been green, turned red, and I swear, it was like he made the decision right then. He turned, ran back to his car, slammed the door, and tore through the intersection. Mike happened to have one of those early car work phones before cell phones were common. He called the cops and we waited with the girl. She couldn't even talk for the first few minutes. She was shaking so bad she could barely stand. Eventually, she said it was her stepdad. They'd been fighting and he forced her into the back seat after she tried to leave the house. The whole way down the road, they were fighting, and the guy had been reaching in the back seat trying to restrain her, which is why he was driving so crazy. She managed to pop the door open at the stoplight. She said she had no idea where he was taking her, just knew she had to get out. Cops showed up pretty quick. We gave statements. Then, the girl went with them and we went on our way. Mike dropped me at a tow lot in town afterward. We actually stayed in touch for a while after that and even got together for some grilling the next time I traveled through that area. But the whole situation is dark and still disturbs me. When stuff like that happens, you start thinking about things like, what would have happened if my car hadn't broken down? Or if Mike hadn't stopped to help me out? If we'd been a minute later? If she'd tried to run and there was no one behind her? Still not sure what made her step that run instead of fight. But it was one of the scariest, most surreal moments I've ever experienced. And it makes me look at every other driver on the road differently now. Like any one of them could be hiding something, or worse, someone in their back seat. I grew up in Vermont. It can get pretty quiet up there. One of the things my friends and I used to do was something we called a pond walk. One of my friends lived in this rural area very close to a decently sized pond. We would stay over at his house on a weekend night like a Friday or Saturday, and the evening's entertainment would be to walk around the pond, which was about 5 miles of dirt road and would take like 2.5 hours. On the walk, we'd hide from the occasional car that would go by. It was a game of stealth, basically. We'd see the headlights, sometimes too late, jump into the woods behind trees or belly down in a ditch or whatever, and freeze while the cars passed and the light spilled across us. There were always a few close calls. This particular night, it was me and the 3 other core friends of mine who hung out together the most. We had walked halfway around the pond already and wandered to a gas station down the road to get some snacks and energy drinks. Then we began the second half of the loop back to my friend's house. I remember it being muggy and gross, like late June maybe, probably like 1 a.m. I forget the exact context, but some form of a bet or dare came together. The punishment was whoever lost, when the next car came through, instead of hiding with the rest of us, had to skip down the road like a complete weirdo holding his thumb out while the car passed them. Again, it's like 1 a.m. in rural Vermont. So the idea of seeing a guy by himself skipping down a dirt road in the middle of the night with his thumb out should come as a totally creepy surprise to whoever was driving by. Anyway, as my luck would have it, I lost. So we settle back into the walk when we see a car's headlights pull onto the road from way back down at the entrance. The entrance was the halfway mark from his house, so we're probably like an hour and 15 away from home base. So the car's coming, the others duck off into the brush like always, and I did what I'd agreed to. I started skipping down the road like a maniac with my thumb out, making a complete fool of myself while I can hear my friends giggling in the bushes. The headlights hit me from behind first. Then, as the vehicle got closer, the more under a spotlight I felt. The sound of the car got louder as it approached me from behind. I stayed committed and kept up the act, waiting for the headlights to move beyond me and let my moment of shame pass. But the car didn't pass. It slowed down and then just crawled along beside me. I heard the window roll down and then someone call out asking if I was good and if I needed a ride. I could also hear music inside and other people talking. That was my breaking point. I dropped the act. It was too awkward. I stopped moving, and so did the car. I couldn't see into the cab very much at all except for the dim reflection of the headlights and the illumination of the dash lights. I called out that I was just joking around and tried to play it off even though I knew there was no saving my pride in this situation no matter what I said. I told them I was just messing around and that it was a joke. The guy didn't laugh. No one did. I could just see his silhouette through the open window in the back seat staring at me. Then, all of a sudden, the vibe shifted. When he spoke again, the tone of his voice was completely different, like he was pissed off or something. He asked me why I thought it was funny. My stomach started to get butterflies. I tried to laugh it off again and began explaining that it was a dare and that my friends were hiding in the woods. But then he opened his door and told me to get in. It was so out of left field I didn't say anything. Then he partially swung his leg out of the car and repeated himself. Told me to get in and that he wanted to see how funny I was. Behind me, I heard one of my friends whisper my name from the woods. The guy turned. He yelled out, demanding to know who was out there. Then I heard the driver yell something and the headlights turned off. My eyes were barely adjusted enough to see him get fully out of the car and up to his feet. Then I heard another door open and someone say, "Put him in." I turned and ran, full sprint, into the trees. My friends were already crashing through the brush with me. You could hear the car rev its engine and see the headlights turn back on. And then the car peeled out of there, spraying dirt and stones as it went. We were able to regroup about 5 minutes later near the edge of the pond, which was down off the road and through a decent bit of forest. We walked back to my friend's house through the woods. We didn't dare get back on the road. It ended up taking an extra hour, but none of us were complaining. We saw headlights periodically slowly track back and forth along the road multiple times, but it was impossible to tell if it was the same people or someone else. Once we got back inside his house, we felt safe, but I don't think any of us slept well that night. We continued to do pond walks after that, but never did anything like that dare again. It's possible those people were just messing with me and turning the tables on the prank, but it was genuinely terrifying, and I don't know what would have happened if I hadn't run. Whenever I tell that story, some people think it's funny, and others think I'm lucky that I got out of there in one piece. This story took place back in the late 80s when I was in my mid-20s. I lived alone and worked the front desk at a motel. I had a random day off in the middle of the week, so I decided to go for a drive up to a larger town about 45 minutes away. It was just to kind of clear my head and maybe grab some lunch. It was a quiet stretch of state highway. No cell phones back then, just you, your car, and whoever you ran into. On the way there, I saw a guy on the shoulder with a broken down bicycle. He was younger, pretty clean cut, short hair, button-up shirt, and a windbreaker jacket. Not the kind of person who'd normally raise a red flag at a first glance. He wasn't holding out his thumb or anything, just standing there next to the bike like he was debating walking it the rest of the way. It was a little weird to see somebody on the side of the highway with a bicycle, but to me it just looked kind of desperate, and I felt bad for him. Hitchhiking was different back then. There wasn't as much scary lore about it. It was actually romanticized. I had never personally done it, but I just viewed it as helping out somebody in need. I wasn't in a rush, so I slowed down and asked if he needed help. He said he was heading into a town maybe 5 miles away and the chain on his bike was shot. I told him to toss the bike in the back seat and that I'd give him a lift. He thanked me and was very polite and almost apologetic about the hassle. For the first 10 minutes or so, it was totally normal. He didn't talk much, just gave short answers when I asked where he worked or what happened to the bike. Said he lived with his uncle and was between jobs. He mostly just stared out the window and had this kind of down, melancholy tone to him. I don't know what he had going on in his life, but I felt bad for the kid. About 20 minutes into the drive, I started to feel like the 5 miles away he originally told me wasn't an accurate estimate. I didn't want to be rude, so I asked him again where he wanted to be dropped off, hoping it would prompt him to talk and give me a heads up. He told me that we passed where he was going 10 minutes ago and to just keep driving. I remember I sort of laughed, thinking maybe he was joking. He then repeated the same thing, word for word, without turning his head. I felt this slow wave of dread rise up inside me. I was suddenly second-guessing everything I had thought about the kid. At the time, I couldn't tell if he was just kind of an odd duck or had difficulty interacting with other people or something and didn't know how to respond properly to social cues. I glanced over and he was still looking out the window, but he had his right hand in his inside jacket pocket. It looked like he was holding something. I tried to pivot out of it and calmly leveled with him. I told him it was no problem and to just tell me where he wanted me to go and I would take him there. He didn't move, just kept his hand in his jacket pocket and told me to keep driving. We were on a stretch of highway with no shoulders, just woods on either side and a concrete median separating both directions. No cars behind me. I didn't know what to do. I thought about slamming on the brakes or swerving into a gas station or something dramatic. But there was nothing around and I had no idea how he would react. Then I had this stupid, desperate idea. I confessed to him that I had bladder issues, which was true, and that I needed to use the bathroom terribly badly, which was a lie. He didn't say anything at first, just sat there like he was internally negotiating whether or not I was being honest with him. Then finally, he told me I could pull over and to do it quickly on the side of the road and leave the car running. I thanked him and spotted a grassy spot on the shoulder coming up that had no guardrail. I slowed down looking for a place to pull over, and as soon as I reached the opening, I put on my hazards, stopped, threw it in park, flung the door open, and ran. I ran across the other lanes of traffic and the median, waving my arms around like a crazy person. A box truck slowed down and stopped on the opposite shoulder. I ran straight for it. The guy in the truck jumped out. I think he could tell it was obvious there was an emergency based on how I was behaving. I don't know if he could hear me, but I started screaming about how I thought the guy in my car had a weapon. When we looked back, the kid was gone. My passenger door was wide open, and his bike was still in the back seat, but he was nowhere. Must have run off the shoulder and directly into the woods. When the traffic cleared for a minute, the truck driver and me walked back over to my vehicle to make sure it was clear. No sign of the kid. I took out his bike and chucked it down the hill, then thanked the truck driver, got back in my car, and left. No idea what was up with that kid, or whether he even had a weapon. But clearly, he knew whatever his intentions were, they were dark enough to prompt him to run away as soon as I started calling for help. That was the one and only time I will ever pick up a hitchhiker. And I don't care how safe someone looks. Clean clothes, polite manners, none of that means anything until they take off the mask. I started seeing this girl I met online. This was maybe our third or fourth date. We'd gone out for dinner that night. Nothing fancy, just a little Thai place that she liked. I remember thinking that she was different from anyone I dated before. Not in a bad way, more like she had this weird confidence. Artsy, offbeat, not trying to impress anyone, and kind of intense in this way I couldn't put my finger on. But I liked her. She was cool. I drove her home after dinner and she asked me if I wanted to come up to her apartment for a drink. I remember hesitating. Not because I felt unsafe or anything, just it was still kind of early and I didn't know her that well, and honestly, I'm not great with women or used to them being upfront with me in that way. But I said sure. Her apartment was strange. Not dirty or gross, just packed. Every wall had something different going on. It was like a weird museum. There were these old paintings with weird faces, like surrealist stuff, and shelves lined with what looked like antique dolls and little sculptures. She had some taxidermy, too, like a raccoon in a tiny rocking chair and a fox head mounted on the wall wearing sunglasses. There was even a full-size dog with a cigar in its mouth. I asked where she had found the stuff, and she said that she made most of it, that she was an artist but didn't really post her work anywhere, just did it for herself. I asked her specifically about the animals, and she said that she had found them. I wasn't sure how to respond to this. I definitely did not expect her to be collecting animals to practice taxidermy on for fun. And also, that dog, could have been someone's pet or something. It was not a wild animal. I joked that her place had a real haunted museum vibe, trying to be funny, not rude. But she just kind of didn't say anything, and it seemed like maybe I had unintentionally offended her. Before I could ask anything else, she offered to make us drinks and then disappeared into the kitchen. While she was gone, I wandered a little, not really snooping, just looking, drifting around. The shelves were cluttered with tiny little things, like intentionally messy. Then I found this shelf by itself. It was sort of like a little shrine or something, sitting beneath a glass cabinet. It was like a miniature scene. There was a figure sitting at a table and I picked it up. It was no more than like 6 inches tall, and at first I thought it was just another random doll. But then I noticed the clothing. It was wearing a hoodie, the same faded navy blue hoodie that I owned. It looked exactly like the one I wore on our first date. The doll had the same hair as me, the same features. I was dumbfounded. I remember feeling my stomach tighten and my heart rate go up. Like this moment where your brain tries to come up with a bunch of logical explanations at once and they all just sort of fall short. So your body's sense of panic kicks in. I wondered maybe if I was just projecting or if it was somehow a coincidence. But it wasn't. It was me. She made a doll of me. Then I realized that the rest of the stuff on the shelf was like an entire depiction of our first date. The cafe we met at, the other people who were there. It was one of the weirdest things I have ever seen in my life. Like, who would ever do something like that? Like, she could pretend that this was something else, but it was clear as day me in the cafe from our first date. No question in my mind. She came back into the room while I was still holding the doll. I didn't know what to say. Like, part of me felt violated. Another part of me felt a little flattered. And then another part was completely creeped out by it. I held up the doll and joked that if I knew she was going to make a doll out of me, I would have dressed better for the occasion. She didn't seem embarrassed by it at all, and just told me directly that she makes them sometimes, of people she gets close to. To me, this was a super eccentric thing to do and borderline creeper shit. I asked if she'd made dolls of other people she'd dated as well. There was an odd pause where I watched her gears turn, and then she said something like, "Yeah, but those didn't work out." I asked where the other ones were. She told me they were put away, and she didn't want to talk about it anymore. I asked if I could see them, and she told me she'd rather that I didn't. I was at a total loss for words at this point. Like, what the hell was going on here? I went to put the doll down and happened to turn and look directly into the glass cabinet above the shrine. Inside were maybe 5 or 6 other dolls, all guys. Different clothes, different faces, different builds, but they were all made the same way. Handcrafted, hyper-detailed, like someone had studied every little feature of these men and tried to shrink them down into dolls. But their heads. Every one of them was broken in this like gnarly way with painted on gore protruding out. One had a cracked forehead. One had the whole top of his skull caved in. Another was scalped, like it had had the whole top of his head ripped off. All of them looked like they had been made and then later brutally destroyed in some super specific, deliberately violent way. I turned and looked at her. Her expression was almost completely blank, just nothing coming off of her. I started to ask her something about the dolls, but it got fumbled up in my mouth, so I just excused myself and said I needed to step outside for a second. Told her I'd be right back. She didn't argue. Just stood there, watching me, still holding the drinks she'd made. My heart was thudding. I didn't run, I walked, slow and steady like I was in a movie where any sudden move would set something off. Got outside, ran down the street to my car, locked the doors, and drove. Didn't even check my mirrors until I was halfway across town. I blocked her the next morning, never talked to her again, never heard anything from her either. But obviously, I still think about it. Not constantly, just every now and then, when somebody mentions weird dates or red flags. I wonder what would have happened if I'd stayed longer, or if I'd spent the night and fallen asleep next to her, or if I'd said the wrong thing, or if I hadn't noticed that doll at all. I also wonder if the doll of me ended up in that cabinet. So this random night, my girlfriend and I, we're both girls by the way, decided to go bowling. Just something to do after work. We'd been dating a couple months, long enough to be pretty comfortable with each other, but still in that phase where you're learning each other's quirks. She picked this retro bowling alley with neon lights and 80s music on the speakers. It had this goofy charm to it. College kids drinking pitchers of beers, a few families in the early lanes, and that familiar greasy popcorn smell. The guy in the lane next to us caught my attention pretty quickly. He was alone, maybe early 50s, wearing a tucked-in dress shirt and slacks. Way more put together than the rest of us. Not in a flashy way, just off. He wasn't drinking, barely bowled, mostly sat and watched other people, including us. It didn't seem to bother my girlfriend, but it was making me feel weird. I tried to ignore him, but at one point I accidentally made eye contact with him and he was already looking at me. He smiled at me, so I smiled back because that's just what you do. But then, a little while later, I bowled this awful frame, 2 gutter balls, and as I came back to sit, he stood up and came over. He told me that my form wasn't bad, but I was just releasing early. I tried to roll with it and kind of laughed and nodded, trying to keep it polite. My girlfriend gave me this mock innocent look like, "Ooh, your coach is here." And then we moved on. But he came back. A few frames later, he walked over again with another unsolicited tip. Then he started making small talk, asking how often we bowl, where we're from, told us we were beautiful. My girlfriend stepped in this time, still friendly but firmer, said we were actually on a date and were just sharing a little time together. He said nothing, had this look on his face like she had told him to get away from us. He turned around and walked back to his lane, except he didn't bowl again. He just sat there, watching us. Not like staring constantly, not doing anything that would necessarily set off an alarm with the staff, but just enough to make the hairs on my neck stand up. You could just feel this dark anger coming off of him. It was that thing where you know somebody is watching you, but you don't want to look their way because you don't know what will happen when you make eye contact. And I didn't want him to take it as an invitation to come back over again. When our hour was up, we turned in our shoes and left. I glanced behind us as we walked out. His lane was empty. He must have left right after us or gone to the bathroom or something. We got to the car, still no sign of him. I chalked it up to nerves. I dropped my girlfriend off at her place. We laughed about it on the drive, nicknaming him Coach Creep, and making up dumb stories about how he probably lives in a bowling alley basement somewhere. I don't mean this to come off like I'm some sort of man-hating lesbo or something. I'm not. We were just having fun. I kissed her goodnight and started the drive back to my place. I parked near my apartment building and walked up the sidewalk in front of the building. As I made the turn up the walkway to the entrance, I caught the glimpse of a dark SUV down the street with its lights off. I honestly wouldn't have even seen it if the street lamp hadn't glinted off the hood. I stopped where I was and just watched it. There was a beat, and then suddenly it snapped on the headlights and peeled out down the street. I hurried inside and got up to my apartment. I locked up and got ready for bed. The next morning, my building manager called. She said something disturbing had happened during the night. Around midnight, someone buzzed in under a fake name, said they were meeting someone on my floor. They loitered in the lobby until a tenant let them in. Then, they came up to my floor, knocked on a random door, and had a conversation with the tenant, and then the guy got violent with them. Then, the guy just stood in the hallway outside my apartment. Didn't knock, didn't try to open my door, just stood there. The manager said they'd watched the guy on the security cam for a full minute, just standing still. Then, when the manager came up to confront him, he smiled and walked off like it was nothing. Then, cops showed up. It turns out he knocked on a random door asking which apartment was mine. And when the guy inside wouldn't tell him, he literally assaulted him. I asked if they kept the footage. They did, and yeah, it was him, Coach Creep. We filed a report. Police said they were keeping an eye out and had a report from the other tenant. They said that with the footage, they should be able to track him down. A few days later, my girlfriend called me from the cafe she worked at, freaking out. She said she was sure the guy from the bowling alley was watching her from across the street through the window. I told her to call the cops, which she did. Evidently, he left, or at least was out of sight when the cruiser showed up. The police did end up finding him, and he was charged. We got a restraining order against the guy and haven't encountered him since. For a while after that, I had a friend living in the same building walk me from my car to the building if I got home late. My girlfriend and I stayed together for a few more months, but something had shifted. It was like that night had broken the safe little bubble we'd been building. Things got distant. I never saw that guy again, but some nights I still check the peephole before I go to bed, expecting him to be standing there in the hallway, just waiting to figure out which door is mine. It was the first warm day of spring, and my girlfriend and I had decided to do a little picnic at the park near her place. We weren't doing anything special, just sandwiches, some chips, a couple sodas. It was just a casual way to celebrate the end of winter and spend a little more time together. We found a spot under a tree in this little clearing, not too far from the fountain. There were families on the playground, a few people walking dogs, some joggers cutting through the path. It wasn't packed, but there were enough people around that it felt busy. About 15 feet away, there was another couple on a blanket, a man and a woman. They weren't eating or talking, just sitting there, completely still. There was one water bottle between them, one book. That was it. The guy was sitting upright, arms crossed. The woman had her hands folded in her lap, almost like she was bracing for something. I remember thinking they must have had a fight or something awkward, one of those silent standoffs. I felt like I was intruding on their drama by looking over at them, so I tried not to pay too much attention. But after a while, something started to feel off. My girlfriend noticed it before I did. She leaned over and whispered to me that the couple hadn't moved in like 10 minutes. I glanced over again. Still the same, except now I could just barely make out that the guy was speaking. Not loud, not yelling, but low, intense. Like he was talking through his teeth and trying not to move his lips. The woman barely spoke. She kept shifting her eyes, scanning the park like she was trying not to make it obvious she was looking for help or something. At one point, I'm 90% certain I heard her ask him to let her go. I couldn't hear his response, but his tone was defiant. He didn't raise his voice, didn't sound angry, but there was this dead seriousness to him, like he wasn't making a threat, he was just stating a fact. My girlfriend and I both sat there awkwardly, not sure what to do. We kept trying to listen, but they were far enough away that it was hard to catch everything. What we did hear made it clear something was seriously wrong. The woman started crying, not sobbing, just quiet tears, like she was trying to hold it in. Her hand stayed in her lap the whole time. It was like she was afraid to move. The guy was clearly getting pissed and losing his composure. He leaned toward her and told her just loud enough to carry that if she screamed, it would get worse. My girlfriend pulled out her phone and started recording. Not obvious, just resting it on the blanket, camera pointed toward them. The woman must have seen us because she looked directly at us, which caused the guy to follow her gaze. He looked up and saw us. Didn't look surprised, didn't even seem mad about it. He just smiled, like he knew we weren't going to do anything. I stood up and took a few steps toward them and said we were sorry for interrupting, but just wanted to make sure that everything was okay. The guy just turned, didn't stand up, just pointed at me and told me that unless I wanted her spot, I should mind my fucking business. The woman Didn't move, didn't flinch, just stared down at the grass. I spoke directly to her and asked if she needed help. The guy stood up. He was taller than I expected, broad shoulders, and as he stood, he pulled something out from under the blanket. I couldn't see what it was, but I assumed it was a small knife or something. He didn't point it at anyone, just held it discreetly at his side like it was no big deal. Other people nearby were starting to notice. You could feel the energy in the park shift, people slowing down, looking over. My girlfriend shouted that someone needed to call the police. That was when he shoved the woman. Not hard, just enough to knock her off balance. Then he took off, bolted across the grass, through a patch of trees, and disappeared. Some guy tried to chase him, but lost him in the woods. The woman was in shock. She wasn't dating him. She didn't even know his name. She'd been reading alone when he sat down next to her and started chatting. Then he wouldn't leave. He kept saying he had friends watching, that if she screamed or ran, they'd do something worse. She was terrified. She didn't want to believe it was real. I guess she had sat there for over half an hour just hoping someone would step in, hoping someone would notice. The guy didn't leave anything behind. She said the scariest part wasn't even the threats. It was how calm and quiet he was about it, how practiced. Neither of us go to that park anymore. I won't even drive by it because now, every time I see a couple sitting on a blanket, I wonder if they're really together or if one of them is just too afraid to leave.